The protagonist of this comic is a movie star. She has won countless awards through her own hard work. Her name is Solina, and not only is she a talented actress, but she also possesses stunning beauty, making her the object of everyone's envy. However, one day, she had an accident. When she woke up, she was cold and in pain all over. This was very strange because it was the middle of summer. She struggled to sit up and found herself in the mountains, in the middle of a winter forest. Solina was lost and confused, trying to figure out how all this had happened. But then she remembered what she was doing before. She had been filming a movie on the edge of a cliff. Although it was a dangerous job, she was confident in herself. But during the shoot, one of the safety ropes suddenly snapped and she fell from the cliff straight into the sea. She remembered this clearly. But why she was in this forest, she couldn't figure out at all. Saul was sitting there, shivering from the cold, lost in thought. Just then, she suddenly heard a loud noise nearby. An unknown monster came screaming and charging at her, clearly angry and dangerous. It seemed there was no hope of survival. But just then, something came out of nowhere and slit the monster's throat. Standing before the heroine was a man, holding the sword he had used to kill the monster. The girl was saved. What a relief. The man came closer and started speaking some gibberish language she couldn't understand at all. Putting everything together, Saul concluded that she must have been transported to another world. Because what other explanation could there be? Suddenly, her savior held out his hand. She hesitated for a moment, then reached out and took it. Instantly, a shiny, thin bracelet appeared on her wrist. The girl was angry, but she became even more confused when the man exclaimed that the thing actually worked, because she was starting to understand his words. In a brief conversation, the actress realized that since she was in another world, this thing must be some kind of translation device. She also noticed that when she said she was from another world, her new friend wasn't even the slightest bit surprised. It seemed like it wasn't a big deal to him. So she asked him directly if many people ended up here. The stranger agreed, adding that he usually only found corpses and skeletons. This was the first time he had seen a living person. Although the man's cold attitude was a bit scary, the girl decided to follow him until she was safe. So she turned on the charm and asked if he was some kind of knight, the kind that slays monsters. The man smiled, but the smile was even creepier than before. Saul thought to herself that he was the perfect candidate for the cold northern duke in a romance fantasy novel. Finally, the stranger introduced himself. Calcion Lombardsky, the ruler of Linbard, the duke of the northern realm of the acclaimed kingdom. The girl also held out her hand and introduced herself, but used the alias she used overseas, feeling it was safer, Solina. Calcion felt something was off about Saul's gesture and asked about it, but she said it was just a form of greeting. She thought to herself that the etiquette here might be different, but the Duke took her hand and kissed the back of it. His gaze never left her hand as he welcomed the stranger to this new land. The girl felt flustered, as this kind of thing only ever happened to her on set or at award ceremonies. The man noticed that Saul looked like a commoner, but acted like a noble lady. But she explained that in her world, people weren't divided into commoners and nobles. He had hoped she was of noble birth, as she might have been useful then, but it all depended on her abilities. So Saul asked what would happen if she wasn't a noble and had no use. Calcion gently held her chin and replied that in that case, she would have to find her own use, and added that this was on the condition that she wanted to leave this mountain alive. This motivated her, as she assured him that she would sacrifice everything to become the person he needed. The Duke said that if she wanted to live in his territory, she had to provide something useful for the development of Linbard. Sol suggested contributing in the areas of culture and arts, as where she came from, she was a rather famous actress, especially known for her excellent acting skills. He asked her to demonstrate her acting skills on the spot, and she, a bit flustered, asked who she should play. The man thought for a moment and chose the role of a villainess. The actress knew she had to improvise, but she had to try, as it was better than dying. So she strode up to him, exuding charisma, grabbed the back of his head, pulled his face towards hers, and looking down on him, began her villainous monologue. Her performance was so over the top that the man was a bit taken aback. But he listened intently, sometimes even responding. In the end, the girl got a little anxious, wondering if she had overdone it. After a moment, our judge finally gave his approval. He said he wanted to hire her for a role where she would enter high society and pretend to be his lover. And on top of that, she would also receive death threats. The girl was shocked by the offer, but she knew if she refused, he wouldn't take her with him, so she asked what she would get in return and the Duke offered her the chance to live. The heroine argued that the motivation for the job was insufficient. If he was willing to entrust this to her, it meant no one could play the role as well as she could, which also meant they were in the same boat, living in high society and keeping a secret. So the Duke had to give her something to ensure her loyalty. So Calcion promised her that she would live in the castle and enjoy a life of luxury. He would even give her hope of returning to her own world. He said there was a way, but he couldn't be sure, and it involved an extremely dangerous monster territory. Once the mission was complete, he would take her there himself, but there was no guarantee she would be able to return. Saul agreed, saying it would be excellent motivation and that she would give it her all. Our heroes returned to the castle to finalize the plan. The Duke was carrying her the whole time, and his men looked somewhat shocked when they greeted them. The ruler explained that he had found the woman in the woods, saved her from some monsters, and was late because he was escorting her. One of the men offered to take the girl's cloak, saying it must be heavy. But Calcion pulled Saul away from the man and refused, his tone a bit possessive, though he himself didn't seem too sure. Back in the woods, the actress said they needed a solid backstory, because a mistress who appeared out of thin air needed an origin story. To this, the Duke added that unexpected details could raise questions. The girl then offered a very simple explanation for the others. The Duke saved a beautiful woman from monsters and fell in love with her at first sight. So, in front of his men, she sat on the Lord of Linbard's lap and joked that if the Duke was holding her, she wouldn't mind helping out a little. Seeing His Grace the Duke get nervous and start to stammer, she had to cut in. They had practiced his loving gaze in the woods, trying to make it look more believable. But under his stare, Saul felt more like prey than a lover. At that point, she suggested he smile, thinking it was his expression that was making things awkward. But his smile didn't radiate love or tenderness, only the desire to kill his prey. The whole thing was too difficult for the man, so she told him they needed to create an atmosphere. The actress suggested he imagine that she had come to this forest specifically to seduce the Duke and had been obsessed with him ever since. She also explained that to make the act look real, he not only had to agree with everything she said, but also show through his words and actions how infatuated he was with her. After mulling over a few lines, she came up with a simple line for His Grace the Duke. It was a line that would fool everyone. They rehearsed for a long time because the Duke just couldn't say the line with the right expression. They were also standing at the door, waiting for the Lord to answer, but he had frozen up at that moment. Sol reached out and whispered in his ear, trying to get him to say it, while the terrible actor kept getting distracted. Finally, Calcion delivered his line, saying he would carry his companion himself. Sure enough, the subordinates were shocked by what was happening before their eyes. They entered the castle, where servants greeted them and announced that the bath and dinner were ready. The master gave the same order for his girl. They went into a room to discuss the plan, and the Duke explained why Solina needed to be his villainous lover. It turned out his supposed fiancée had died, and rumor had it she was a villainess. The tragedy occurred the night before their engagement, right in his own estate. The lady's death was ruled a suicide, but Calcion didn't believe it. The wound was too deep, so he needed to investigate it himself, and for that, he needed someone who could blend in smoothly. Just then, someone from outside the door announced that the bath was ready and asked if the servants could come in. Saul told the Duke that she might be found out when she changed, and that her clothes, being from her world, would look strange. I just had an idea, so don't be alarmed if I start acting strangely. Put on a show and speak from your diaphragm so they can hear you through the door. It's showtime. Now the servants outside will hear me yelling that I don't want this, begging the Duke to order everyone to leave, even his own men, because I don't want anyone touching him. This is my line. No servants needed. Everyone out. Saul was excited. We did it. The man showed me where the bath was. While I was in the tub, I had another idea and asked the Duke to come closer. I threw my clothes at him and told him to rip them to shreds to get rid of the problem for good. He started tearing at the clothes, but then he froze, grabbed me, and covered my mouth, telling me to be quiet because we were being spied on. This must happen often, because Calcion wasn't even surprised. He just stood there, considering whether to kill the eavesdropper or let them live. Just then, I suggested we use this to our advantage and create a believable story to fool everyone. The Duke admitted he was a bad actor and asked if they should actually do something. She then pushed him away, thinking he was being inappropriate. The actress said she would handle everything, and all he had to do was clap. But first, they needed to rip the clothes. Suddenly, she grabbed his hand and pulled him right into the tub, then said that this kind of thing should be left to a professional like her. Her performance was putting on a steamy show, pretending the couple was having a good time, which made the Duke blush. Afterward, the girl suggested they get out quickly to see the servant's reactions. The servant outside the door was shocked and believed everything she heard. This meant everything was going according to plan. She approached the couple, saying she would escort Lady Solina to her bath and help her get ready. The girl was cleaned up and dressed. During their conversation, it was mentioned that the former Duchess preferred clothes like that. Solina wondered if wearing this would remind Calcion of his mother. The maids wanted to present the lady to the Duke, but she couldn't wait and quickly ran to the Duke to show off her new outfit. The man was not pleased with what he saw, but the servant said they were just following orders. So he ordered the person to be brought before him. Before he could finish, Solina jumped onto his lap like a playful and possessive girlfriend. Lady Janet interrupted them, apologizing for her instructions and explaining that besides the late Duchess's belongings, the only other clothes in the palace were servant uniforms. Solina thought the Duke wouldn't tolerate this, but she was wrong. He thanked Janet for keeping the castle in order, then asked her to prepare dinner for them and dismissed her. As she left, Lady Janet gave Solina a look back with a malicious smirk. It was strange, as if she didn't like her. At dinner, the Duke introduced his closest friend, Dion, the captain of the knights. He also added that he knew the details of their plan and that she didn't need to act in front of him. Dion said that even if she had no feelings for the Duke now, there could be consequences, as his grace was a target of everyone's desire. The girl replied that while looks and money are important, she likes people who show tenderness and speak kindly, so they didn't have to worry too much. She meant that she would never fall for his grace, the Duke, anyway. If her acting was good enough to make Dion doubt the plan, then everything was going accordingly. When they were alone, the man warned that there would be spies everywhere, at all times, just like in the bathroom. So she had to be careful even when she was alone. The actress said it wasn't a problem. She had been watched her whole life, so one spy wouldn't bother her. Then Calcion asked her not to act when it was just the two of them, but she refused, saying they needed to practice even in private so the Duke could convincingly pretend to be in love. Later she asked who she should be wary of. It turned out the guy had someone he was completely fed up with. The next day, a lady stood before them, gushing about how worried she was for the Duke's broken heart, which was why she had come to Limbard. But it looked more like she was determined to force a date. This was the very person they had talked about yesterday. The one the Duke had warned her was exhausting to be around. Even though Calcion's fiancée had been killed just a month ago, this lady was clinging to him like a leech. So either she didn't believe she was dead, or she was the killer. So Solina decided to be extra careful with her. The girl's name was Fiona. She was always trying to act cute, talking about herself in the third person and sticking to the Duke like glue. Solina decided to come to the rescue. So she grabbed the man's arm and started pulling him away, with Fiona chasing after them. She was shouting something and eventually caught up to them, starting to pester the Duke about how tired she was from her journey and wanting him to hold her hand. But she was flatly denied that pleasure. They were avoiding her like the plague, but she didn't even notice. So she just grabbed his arm and tried to push Solina away. But our girl was not one to be trifled with and fought fire with fire. She used Fiona's method, clinging to his other arm and whining like a child about how tired she was and wanted to eat. Fiona pretended to be on the verge of fainting, trying to grab the Duke, but he just pulled his arm back and ordered a room to be prepared for the lady. Our heroes could finally leave while the guest behind them fumed, annoyed that her plan had failed. They sat at the table, talking about how strange Lady Fiona was and how Saul would also have to meet some big shots from different fields. The girl thought to herself that she had to do her best not to get hurt or die before they found the unknown culprit. She stopped eating, pretending to have lost her appetite. After watching the man eat for a bit, she asked for a taste of his steak, saying it looked more appetizing. He pushed the plate towards her. Then she asked him to cut the steak, and with her own fork. Calcion cut her steak, but she couldn't feed herself, so she asked him to do it. He knew spies could be watching them at any moment, so he complied. She was so happy that her appetite even returned, and she asked for dessert. But the man couldn't stand using the same fork he had been feeding Solina with, which annoyed him greatly. So he stormed out of the room, leaving her alone, without even thinking about how inappropriate it would look. She came up with a way to teach him how to act on a date. So she asked a servant where the Duke had gone, probably to his study. She decided that if they were going to be in a relationship, there had to be action, so she changed her clothes and appeared at his window with flowers. He let her in, offering a hand to help, but she jumped onto the windowsill herself and managed it easily. Calcion took the flowers, and Solina explained that she was here to create a situation to plan plant the seeds of romance in his heart. She also said he couldn't kick her out or things would get weird and rumors might start. So while the Duke was busy with his affairs, the girl just relaxed on the sofa, reading a book. She didn't remember falling asleep, but when she woke up, she was still in his office, on the same sofa, covered with his coat. I thought that was a little sweet. She decided to go to the training grounds to stretch her legs and maybe get Calcion to teach her some local fighting techniques. She ran into a servant and asked where the Duke was, and they told her he had gone to the training grounds. Sensing the servant's attitude, Solina decided to play the villainess and, with a single look, demanded to know where the training grounds were. The maid's insolence made her so angry that she forgot to ask where the training grounds actually were and ended up getting lost in the garden. Lady Fiona startled her by popping out from behind some bushes, guessing she was also looking for Calcion. They started bickering, with Fiona yelling angrily and Solina just making jokes and teasing her. Then Fiona threatened her directly, saying that if she kept acting this way, she would end up dead, saying that another person who got close to the Duke was already dead, implying she would be next. The heroine knew she was standing unarmed in the middle of a maze garden with a murder suspect, and if things went south, she could really die. And she felt that the lady might not be alone, that she might have accomplices lurking somewhere. Just then, the Duke's voice called out for Solina. His timing couldn't have been better. She ran into his arms, relieved to be saved, as she was genuinely terrified. The man asked what on earth had happened with Fiona, but she was completely speechless. In his arms, she smelled his cologne, which calmed her down. She decided it was time to pull herself together and start acting. She went back to that cute, childish voice, complaining that the lady had threatened to kill her if she clung to him. Meanwhile, the lady clung to him from the other side and started babbling about something. This whole show was a real headache. The actress decided it was time for the grand finale. She said she was cold and tired and demanded to be carried. The Duke, of course, complied, picking her up and ordering Fiona to be escorted back to her room, as she was tired too. Back in the room, the girl detailed how she had been threatened with death. She figured if Fiona was the killer, it would be difficult for her to do it herself, and she would most likely hire someone. Saul was really scared by the near-death experience, but the man said she handled it perfectly. She was about to go to sleep when she stopped, thinking that since she had made such a scene, they would probably have to sleep together. They both froze from the sudden pressure, but they were saved by the arrival of the servants, who came to prepare them for bed. In the bathroom, Solina was offered a see-through nightgown that showed everything, saying it was the best armor to capture His Grace the Duke. But the girl just wanted to sleep, so she asked for normal pajamas. The maid said they were going all out for the night, as it was the first time His Grace had brought a lover back to the estate, so it could be a great opportunity for the Duchy of Lindbard to get an heir. Saul finally got some normal clothes from them and went to the bedroom, but was greeted by the Duke in a super romantic setting. He explained that the servants had told him to do it to show respect to the lady. Luckily, our heroes both just wanted to sleep with no strings attached. But the girl couldn't sleep and wouldn't let the man sleep either. First, she wanted to sleep on the left side of the bed because she always rolled to the left in her sleep. Then she needed more pillows. She said she couldn't sleep because she was nervous, as it was her first time sleeping in the same bed with a man. When he, surprised, asked her to repeat that, he realized he had misspoken and apologized. The girl was used to people making assumptions based on her looks, and then asked if she really looked like the type to sleep around. The man explained that it was because her acting was so superb that even though it was just a game, he felt like he was really falling for her. The girl then replied that since she was trying her best to look ahead, he shouldn't fall for her at the last minute. The hero agreed with her and decided he would be careful. They finally fell asleep. In the morning, the girl woke up to find them sleeping in each other's arms. As good as it felt to be next to him, she had to come up with something to avoid the awkwardness. She tried to slip out from under him before he woke up, so she could pretend nothing had happened. But the man just grunted, indicating he had been awake for a while. The girl rolled onto her stomach and started pretending to be asleep, but of course it didn't work, though it was worth a try. Her cheeks were a little red. The situation was awkward, which was exactly why she had wanted to sleep on the left side. They were going to meet a guest that morning. Calcion said she was from a Marquis Theron's family, not as simple as Fiona. So the actress should change her strategy. Serena was worried they would greet the guest at the main gate. They had only greeted Fiona at the front door and left in a hurry. But the Duke assured her that for most guests, this was basic etiquette, and Fiona was just a special case. But speak of the devil, Miss Fiona immediately appeared by their side, also ready to greet the guest. She clung to the man as usual, and Serena could tell he didn't like it, but she found it amusing. A servant announced that Miss Rosalind had arrived. Our heroine saw a young woman stepping down from a carriage. She approached the Duke, saying she had missed him so much that she came uninvited and apologized for it. Fiona couldn't help but sarcastically remark that Rosalind was quite the vixen, showing up the moment she heard he was leaving. Then, Miss Rosalind noticed her and started by saying how surprised everyone was by her arrival, also mentioning her absence from the tea party. She said nothing, pretending to be very concerned about Miss Fiona. But her main purpose for this trip was to offer condolences on behalf of the capital's elite. Feeling that enough pleasantries had been exchanged, Rosalind asked if they could go inside, completely ignoring Serena, as if she didn't exist. But our heroine didn't mind. She snuggled up to Calcion and announced her presence by asking if it was time for breakfast. Rosalind asked the Duke who this woman was, but he just stated plainly that this was someone he had brought back on a whim, ignoring the derogatory implication. Despite this, Serena introduced herself. The lady was very rude, pretending she had never heard the name and asking which family she came from. But our heroine believed that wasn't the point. What mattered was who you are. During the conversation, Rosalind brought up that old story about how Calcion once said he would marry 100 times if his wife could be as useful as a hunting dog. Then she started comparing Serena to a dog and implied she needed training, since they were talking about the dogs of the Lemberg Duchy. The actress wasn't falling for this petty trick. She smiled and said that a dog like her, it didn't need training. Someone as beautiful as her should be protected from any trouble and have her beauty admired. Then Rosalind politely asked if she could dine with the lady, and Serena agreed. Fiona was delighted to finally be alone with the Duke, but he got up to leave, saying he would skip breakfast, wished her a pleasant day, and said they would see each other at dinner. The girl's attempt to get his attention again failed, and she was so angry the flower in her hair fell off. Serena noticed that the riffraff had left and wondered how the sharp-tongued genius would act when they were alone. But before she could finish the thought, someone kicked her hard in the stomach. Rosalind pinned her against the wall and asked her how much money it would take for her to leave the Duke. Serena quickly explained she wasn't in it for the money, but the lady declared that whatever price she named would be a pittance to her, so she repeated the question. The actress decided to turn the tables, grabbing her hand and asking how much the lady could give her. Perhaps the lady had 100 dresses like the one she was wearing. She was sure the former duchess's gowns could be considered national treasures. Rosalind agreeing to this price just proved how crazy she was. And powerful. I almost took the deal, but I came to my senses and told her it would be a huge loss to accept. I added that what I needed was something very rare, and I wasn't sure if Miss Rosalind could get it, the Duke's heart. Then she brought up the Duke's late fiancée, Ariel, and warned me that my greed could get me killed just like her. I pointed out that for someone to call me greedy, Rosalind herself was sticking close to the Duke despite knowing the risks. So she must think she's safe by his side, which means she either has powerful protection or she thinks she can become powerful, or she's the murderer, which makes her the #1 suspect. In any case, I restated my position. I don't want money, only the Duke's heart. Rosalind insisted she didn't need money or status, things she could get anytime. She added that she could become more powerful than she was now, and that I had no idea what she was planning. Rosalind turned and started to walk away, warning the girl that nothing could be done if she didn't know how to value her own life. By dinner time, the four of them were seated at a table piled with far more food than they needed. The heroine tried to recall some kind of special etiquette regarding cutlery, but couldn't remember. She decided to ignore it and just grabbed a piece of bread with her hands, drawing a sharp comment from Rosalind. She sneered and asked which backwater place she learned her manners from, and if she learned to eat from the animals on Lemberg's mountains. The heroine continued her act, retorting that she didn't know animals ate bread too. Her rival compared her to an animal, even mentioning Fiona's dog, which would eat bread if you threw it on the floor. But Fiona corrected her, saying it was a cat, and no matter how much she loved it, they ate separately. Miss Rosalind's words were practically dripping with sarcasm and the desire to humiliate. So Serena stabbed her knife into the meat, saying that if she were an animal, she'd be more likely to bite Miss Rosalind's neck. Fiona was horrified by the statement, as if she had never seen such behavior. But the protagonist reassured her that she had nothing to worry about, as there wasn't much meat on her to bite, and besides, she didn't like chewing on bones. Rosalind commented that Serena was like a cat, making a mess of the whole table while eating. Then she thought that if Serena acted like an animal, her mind was probably just as shallow. The protagonist replied that this was why the Duke chose her, and told the lady to try it too. Her rival let her know that it was difficult to cater to the Duke's wild tastes, and that her upbringing and status wouldn't allow her to do so. Just then, Calcion joined the conversation. He confirmed that the Theoran family's status was indeed noble, saying that the Limburg family was completely different from the Theoran family, and a marriage alliance between the two had been unceremoniously rejected. He added that perhaps it was for the best, as Miss Rosalind's status was a thorn in his side. As a man from the north, he felt more at ease in nature, in the company of animals that slept on the ground. But Miss Rosalind wasn't here to nitpick, but to express her condolences on behalf of the capital's nobles. So the servants came in and placed a large pile of letters in front of the Duke. Rosalind said these were from people in the capital who missed the Duke and asked him to reply, as each one was written with great respect. The night grew late, and Calcion had been buried in the letters for hours. He heard some commotion outside the door. Then Serena walked in, wearing a nightgown top that exposed her shoulders, and apologized for her improper attire, but said it was the maid's idea, not hers. The Duke said it was fine, as the butlers were also always giving him advice on how to spend time with ladies. As she sat down beside him, Calcion covered his face with a piece of paper, his ears turning red. He was clearly flustered by her attire. So Serena decided to change the subject and asked how he had dealt with Rosalind today, since he couldn't even say a word against Fiona. The thing was, he could justifiably oppose her because she had broken off their engagement. He remembered this and used it to get back at her, as he had been holding a grudge. The girl guessed it wasn't a grudge, but regret, but he reacted a bit strongly to that. He said that what he knew of the lady's reputation came from his mother. Then Serena asked for his own opinion. And in his opinion, Miss Rosalind was an insidious and annoying woman, a point Serena agreed with. She then told him how the lady had threatened her and offered her a large sum of money. Even if she was after the Duke's fortune, it raised more questions, as she had no real reason to do so. Serena guessed it was because of his looks, and he even agreed, though perhaps he was just joking. They found a very important letter that looked ornate and different from the others. It was from Crown Prince Lazian. Calcion couldn't ignore this family, as the prince was ambitious, aiming for the throne, and he was the most powerful of the king's grandchildren. He didn't want to have anything to do with him. But all the families were invited to the tercentennial celebration, and he couldn't even refuse. Serena encouraged him, saying they had to go to the capital to study the social circles anyway, and for the investigation, he also needed to improve his acting skills, so she jumped onto his lap and started playing the part of mistress, begging her lover to take her to the capital. Afterwards, she said with a frustrated look that his acting was terrible. Then she explained she was just teasing him to build a believable cover story, since he could lie even with a gun to his head. The girl had fallen asleep, but he remained sitting there stiffly, feeling like he was about to lose control. In the morning, a servant told him that Miss Rosalind had invited Serena to tea. Since the girl had no clothes to wear, she had them reply that she couldn't go. The servants also said that Rosalind wouldn't mind her rudeness, even if the lady came in rags. The girl sent a letter to the Duke, saying she would attend the tea party, but only because she didn't want to see the servants punished. Serena came up with another brilliant idea to shock the bitch without wearing old clothes. She showed up at the tea party in her nightgown, figuring it was better than rags. Rosalind thought there should be a limit to rudeness, and that she wouldn't have minded if she had shown up in old clothes. But Serena said that, unfortunately, her old dress was torn by her master last night. Serena found Rosalind's expression priceless. She looked completely devastated. The lady accused Serena of deliberately showing up in her nightgown to insult her, telling obvious lies. During the conversation, she mentioned that she would be going to the capital for the celebration as the Duke's partner. Rosalind flew into a rage, slammed the table, and started yelling. But just then, the Duke appeared. The girl realized it looked like she was bullying Serena, and knew she had to make it seem like this girl had ruined the tea party on purpose. But that's when our heroine turned on the waterworks and started crying. The man put his arm around her and reminded Miss Rosalind that this was not her private playground. The actress had to see the act through, so she said she was cold and wanted to go back inside, asking him to carry her. The The Duke declared the tea party over and left carrying Serena, leaving the other girl behind. Rosalind was furious at the whole spectacle, and no one knew what was going through her mind. She started showering the man with praise, saying he did a great job, acted perfectly, and showed up at just the right time. The Duke placed her on the sofa and told her to get ready, because he had called for some tailors to rush. A whole bunch of dresses. He sat down next to her and warned her that the further she went, the more nobles she would meet. So she needed to learn how to handle all sorts of crap. Her acting was good, but relying on it as her only weapon meant she would run into situations where acting alone wouldn't be enough. So he decided to arm her with something else. Knowledge. They had 20 days before heading to the capital, and in that time, she had to quickly master etiquette, social skills, and basic culture because she needed to become an exemplary noble lady as well. If she wanted to infiltrate high society, she had to know how they talked so she could blend in and get information out of them. But the real reason he was doing this was because he didn't want to see his partner, Serena, being ostracized. Serena found out that Calcion had never learned the secrets of high society talk either, so she suggested they learn together. But he refused, saying it annoyed him. Serena started to argue that it would be useful since he was about to enter enemy territory and she could send him signals in that language. With that in mind, the heroine suggested they make a bet. The bet was that whoever learned the secret language last would have to grant the other person one wish. The man agreed, as he thought it would be easy, and the girl was confident in anything related to her body, so she wouldn't lose. The man boasted about his advantage, having dealt with nobles for decades, unlike this girl who had just arrived. Serena wanted to take a nap before the tailor arrived, but no such luck as a tailor burst into the room, apparently in a hurry to see them. Devon greeted the Duke and was ordered to get to work. But for some reason, the tailor started taking the man's measurements instead of the girl's. Just then, Calcion grabbed his head, reminded him that she had ordered dresses, not suits, and threatened to kill him. The girl tried to smooth things over, saying everything was fine and there was no need to get angry, as creative people are always a bit crazy. She suggested they get to work because, as the man said, she couldn't be seen in the same dress twice. So the tailor asked the lady to change into something he could actually take measurements in. But the man wasn't going anywhere and just sat there watching them work, his gaze practically burning holes in them. Serena tried to politely shoo him away, reminding him he had a lot of documents to deal with. But he stayed to help pick things out. The tailor finished his measurements and promised to make Miss Serena the most beautiful woman in Lemberg. Then Serena hugged the Duke from behind. She said he thought she was the most beautiful woman even without clothes, a little revenge for him not leaving. The tailor then promised to make the best dresses that would never overshadow Miss Serena's beauty. She asked why someone like him was still here, and not in the capital. He replied that while the capital had its perks, the appreciation for the work was completely different, even when compared to the former Duchess's dresses. The heroine said she wanted a dress that showed off the latest fashion from the capital. The tailor, knowing the lady was entering high society, recommended a dress design that was both extravagant and perfectly on trend. Serena loved it, so the tailor asked if he should make the design in 5 different colors. He went on to explain that the former Duchess always placed her orders this way. He thought Miss Serena would do the same, but he then suggested she make only one of each design. The Duke asked for 7 colors, and the tailor suggested all the colors of the rainbow, plus gold, white, and black. But she turned him down, saying that every design has its one perfect color. Calcion reminded her that they needed to maintain an image of extravagance. She then came up with a different way to handle it, using her own newly invented aristocratic accent. She said that nobles should wear extravagant dresses, not mass-produced ones. They should make only one dress, but with great care, like creating a whole new fabric or embedding precious jewels directly into the garment. The tailor was completely thrilled by these ideas and excited that the lady appreciated their designs. This whole thing would require a lot of manpower and extra funds, which the Duke was ready to pay for. He also said they had to rush 100 options in 20 days. The girl thought there must be some factory she didn't know about. Afterwards, the Duke threw over an advance payment, which the tailor said was more than enough. He was excited to take the job, and she thought the guy was crazy. The next day, Serena had her first etiquette lesson. Calcion asked Miss Janet how things were going. She was silent for a moment, but finally said that Miss Serena was a complete genius and a super fast learner. When the lesson began, Serena wondered why it was just the two of them. Janet explained that she would teach her basic etiquette, then added that once the girl mastered the basics, the joint lessons with the Duke would begin. The protagonist was curious why this woman was teaching her, as her expression said it all, even if she was hiding her disgust. Janet was the second daughter of Baron Merlin, so she knew the rules of etiquette in the city and had plenty of experience. She told the girl not to tarnish the Lemberg family's reputation. Janet promised to do her best to train her, and if things went wrong, she would manage to fix everything. Since our heroine was an actress who had lived countless lives, she felt these etiquette lessons would be a piece of cake. So she told Janet that just demonstrating everything once would be enough for her to memorize it. Janet was skeptical of her confidence, as every noble learned aristocratic etiquette from childhood, yet they were still afraid of messing up before their social debut. But she agreed, warning that if she failed, the girl would pay for every second wasted. Janet stared at Serena, not believing someone like her could actually exist. She had been shown over 50 movements just once, but she repeated them all flawlessly. The girl exuded elegance and even grasped nuances she had never been taught. Serena asked how she did, and her instructor could only say she was perfect. Miss Janet told the Duke everything, adding that no one would believe the girl was a commoner. So she suspected Serena was not who she claimed to be, but Calcion assured her that wasn't the case. He thought that at this rate, they could finish all the lessons before going to the capital and warned her that he would be joining the lessons starting tomorrow. After that conversation, the Duke watched Serena through the window, pondering how the girl could have learned the capital's complex etiquette in a single day. At this rate, he might lose the bet. But the man wasn't upset. He was just curious about what Serena would ask for. That evening, Serena was having tea at a table. The maid already knew about her lessons for the day and told her there were rumors outside about how beautiful Miss Serena was, which explained why the Duke had fallen for her. This maid seemed strange, as every connection was important to her, yet she chose to get close to someone of unknown origin from whom she had nothing to gain. Serena wondered what she was really after, and wanted to expose her. Serena mentioned Miss Janet and her perpetually sour expression. The maid was a bit surprised that the head maid acted that way, even to Serena, and explained that the woman always glared at all the maids and constantly complained about honor. It was a miracle the former Duchess had tolerated her. She told Serena that Janet used to follow the Duchess around, scolding her for every little thing, and was even slapped once for her constant nagging. Serena still had a lot to learn from this maid, and had to keep her close. So she asked for her name, wanting to befriend her. Juno was delighted by the offer, ready to chat anytime. So the heroine mentioned that she'd get death threats if she crossed the line, and wondered if anyone had actually died because of it. The maid whispered that about a month before the wedding, the Duke's bride-to-be had committed suicide at her family home in the capital. Juno had seen her in person, as she was one of the maids who accompanied her to the capital. According to her, the girl was plain, unremarkable, and gloomily silent. The girl was a bit confused by this assessment, as the Duke thought she was quiet and calm, while others saw her as dark and gloomy. Descriptions so similar yet so opposite. Juno didn't like the fiancée at all, because she was messing around with everyone in the capital. But that was a secret. After the next lesson, the heroine returned to the Duke, exhausted, complaining that Lady Janet was a real hard ass. If you messed up, she'd look at you like you were a bug. Lady Janet was like that with everyone except the Duke, though he hadn't noticed. Serena mentioned that the head maid had been slapped by his mother for her constant preaching, but the Duke thought it was just advice on etiquette. That's when the girls suggested he look at it from a different perspective. She carefully brought up the topic of Ariel, and suggested that her death could be considered a suicide caused by the pressure from Janet and others. To explain in detail, she asked him to imagine if the bride-to-be had decided to end her life with no other choice due to pressure from others. Would that count as murder? The rest of the conversation depended on his answer. In his opinion, that situation would be murder. So Serena shared her list of suspects, including Janet and the maids who accompanied the bride to the capital. Their actions might seem like nothing at first glance, even to Calcion, as he never had to be considerate of others like Ariel did. The difference was that the Duke had power, even if he didn't care about others. But for that girl, any misstep could have led to a scandal. She lived in constant fear of being kicked out of the estate. She could have become a social outcast, bringing shame to her family. And a person like that could do anything. Serena knew that feeling. Her career had once plummeted due to rumors, but her family helped her. The Duke wondered if Ariel had no one to lean on. What kind of words could drive a person to want to die? But they couldn't be sure. You also had to consider her fear of ending up on the streets. Calcion wouldn't have cared about a growing scandal. The deal with the Zhang Duchy was simple. The Duke gave them money, and they provided him with a discreet duchess. The heroine then suggested a situation that could give a girl a bad reputation. For instance, she might have an affair in the capital. But Calcion didn't think that was a problem. He believed it was normal for rumors to swirl around the Duchess. Solina pointed out that was just his perspective. But for some, in a situation where you're unwanted, constantly in trouble, and have nowhere to go, death might seem like a better choice. She didn't realize she had jumped to her feet in agitation as she spoke. But the man grabbed her shoulders to calm her down and said he didn't care about the rumors. As long as she herself didn't run away, he would never tear up their contract. Calcion promised he would not abandon Solina. But for the duration of their contract, he demanded that she not get involved with any other man. The next day, the main characters saw their guests off. Miss Fiona and Miss Rosalind set off to return to the capital. But when it was time for Solina and Rosalind to say their goodbyes, the latter didn't miss the opportunity to leave a veiled threat, to get rid of Solina before she reached the capital. Finally, the lessons for the Duke began. Jeanette announced that she would briefly explain a few things His Grace the Duke needed to know. The girl complained about the difference in treatment between the students, but what she got was a lecture about not using honorifics when she complained, even though it wasn't even a real situation. The Duke turned to Madame Jeanette, telling her that her teaching style was stricter than he had expected. But she couldn't explain exactly why the etiquette for teaching him would be different from the etiquette for teaching the ladies. Solina reminded the maid that she wasn't interested in the title of Duchess, nor did she intend to stay here forever. So she didn't need to be lectured so harshly. Calcion finally saw what excessive pressure looked like, and he knew this was just the tip of the iceberg. The girl had long noticed how obedient Jeanette was to her master's words and didn't understand what her deal was. Calcion had heard that Solina was a fast learner, and he himself had learned a little when he was young. So he felt that if Miss Jeanette were less strict, they would finish quickly. But things didn't progress quickly, and even after several hours of learning, the man kept making mistakes. The girl found this amusing, so using the sign language they were learning, she decided to call him an idiot to tease him. He defended himself, saying he wasn't warmed up yet. Solina suggested he try again and, using sign language, asked if she could sleep in his room again. He responded in sign language, and a silent conversation began in which she successfully flustered him. Calcion conceded defeat in their bet and promised to grant her any wish, just to make her stop. But as a final request, she asked him to correctly interpret a sign she made, and he failed again. Solina told him that sign language could be crucial and that he needed to get the hang of it, or it would be harder for him to blend into high society. She made him start over. They began a simple conversation in sign language, and this time, Calcion managed to make the girl shy. The Duke said that Solina had already mastered sign language perfectly, so they could end the sign language lesson and start the dance lesson. He asked the lady if she had ever learned ballroom dancing. The answer was no. She was only slightly interested in K-pop dances, but he didn't need to know that. He explained how partners should greet each other. The young man bows to the lady, while she should curtsy. Afterwards, the Duke took her hand and kissed it. The gesture made the girl's cheeks flush, leaving her flustered. Even though our heroine was the best actress in Korea, she still had trouble controlling her emotions. She thought the man's beauty was simply criminal, and the room suddenly felt hot. The man showed her the basic steps, telling her that in ballroom dancing, the man usually leads, so she just needed to match his rhythm. And so, they began to dance. As Solina sized up her partner's appearance, she decided to bring up the topic of nicknames to avoid the awkwardness, saying she wanted to call him by a name she made up. She chose a mangled version of his name, calling him Calzone. Although he looked displeased, he kept his promise and let her have her way. The girl thought to herself that the more she got to know her dance partner, the more she realized he was actually quite a good person, both in looks and personality. They became somewhat lost in the dance, gazing into each other's eyes, yet each was lost in their own thoughts. They didn't even immediately notice that the dance had stopped and ended. The girl told the Duke how she felt, saying she enjoyed it very much and found it fun. These words stunned the man. He remembered his mother saying he was a terrible dancer, but maybe what he heard from Solina was actually a good thing. Madame Jeanette praised the lady. The Duke mentally agreed. The girl was a genius, because no noble could master etiquette, dancing, and even sign language so quickly. It was simply amazing. The lesson was over. The Duke decided to head back first, and Solina shouted after him that today was fun, calling him Calzone. A few days passed, and their training was over. The girl stood in her room, surrounded by packed luggage. She couldn't believe that the tailor, Dwayne, had actually sewn 100 dresses in just 20 days. There were ups and downs, of course, but she had endured it all and was glad it was over, excited to finally be heading to the capital tomorrow. But before leaving, she wanted to talk to Juna. She thanked Juna for helping her pack, and Juna brought her some chamomile tea to help her relax before her departure. The heroine tried to figure out the maid's motives, why she was always around Ariel. Perhaps it was because the bride was easy to manipulate, or maybe, given how everyone treated her, Juna wanted to make herself seem like the only one who cared. If that was the case, then the maid was also a suspect. It was doubtful she actually committed the murder, but perhaps she had unwittingly contributed to her death. After considering it, Solina asked Juna if she had packed her bags, but she wasn't on the escort list. So Solina promised to put in a good word for her. Her intuition told her that this maid would be useful in finding a key clue. The next day, the couple was already in the carriage. Solina was feeling very bored, especially with the Duke being so quiet, so she decided to just watch him. When she got tired of watching him, she finally asked what he was busy with. He was reviewing some statistical analyses and reports. She asked him to tell her more about it. She was so bored, she wouldn't even mind knowing how many hairs he had on his head. The man told her to stop saying such strange things, but agreed to explain the documents. He showed her a map of Lenbard, and a land where no one dared to go because it was overrun with demonic beasts. That was where he had saved her, which made her wonder if the man was even human. He also showed her the land most suitable for population, where there were hot springs. But population growth meant dealing with the issue of territorial expansion. Lenbard's territory was so vast, it was almost like an independent country. Calcion mentioned he was busy handling a pile of court paperwork that wasn't originally his. It was supposed to be Crown Prince Lason's job, but his temperament was too unstable to handle it. However, things seemed to be better now. Solina thought that all the nobles, especially the royal family, coveted the Duke's power. They wouldn't leave him alone until he either handed over his land or was driven out. This made it seem like the Crown Prince would rather just get rid of the Duke than try to depose him, because he had no family and no heir. This meant Ariel's death was also beneficial to them, preventing her from bearing the Duke an heir. The girl thought the Crown Prince could be a suspect. The Duke added that he wouldn't do it himself, but he might be connected to the death. Half an hour later, they arrived at a way station where they would be staying temporarily. Through the window, the girl saw people coming out to greet the Duke. She started to get nervous about her appearance, needing to braid her hair and change her clothes. She couldn't do it all by herself, so she asked the Duke to help her tighten her sash. Just then, it was announced from outside that they had arrived. It was Calzion's first time helping a lady dress, so he completely messed it up, tying the sash too tightly. Somehow, they ended up in this super awkward position. Just then, the people outside, worried by the commotion inside, yanked open the carriage door. Soon they were seated at the dining table, but she was so embarrassed by what had just happened that she decided to play along and turn it to her advantage. So she used sign language to tell him to get ready, then collapsed right onto his lap. She started saying in a whiny, cute voice that she was hungry and wanted him to feed her. She even gave him a new, cute nickname in sign language. Calcion thought, "What on earth are you doing?" But she just replied in sign language, saying she'd explain after the act was over. He had no choice but to play along, feeding her with a fork, cutting her steak, and listening to her sweet talk. The servants who saw all this were, to put it mildly, completely stunned. This was exactly the effect Solina wanted. Even though Calcion had sworn not to abandon her, she still couldn't fully trust him. She needed some leverage to prevent him from tearing up the agreement, and what she chose was public attention on their relationship. As leverage, He felt there was no need to act when they weren't in Lombard. But she disagreed, saying his acting was so bad they needed to practice. Besides, she couldn't always use sign language to get him to play along. Feeding someone wasn't hard, so the real acting came from her side, including the improvisation. She explained that you can't learn without practice, but she suggested trying a different method and proposed an idea. She told him to imagine some noble asking the Duke why he fell in love with this girl. He just needed to describe the good points that came to mind when he looked at her. She told him to think carefully and then answer what he would say when looking at her. First, Calcion said she was beautiful. Then, he began to describe her appearance in great, exhaustive detail. Solina was embarrassed to hear all these praises and compliments to her face, but she pulled herself together and asked him to summarize. But looking at her, all the Duke could think about was how unbelievably beautiful she was. He said it so sincerely that he didn't understand what he'd done wrong, because Solina just stared at him in silence for a moment. But then she covered her face with her hands, her ears turning red, and barely managed to say that she hoped the Duke would say that about her in public. A servant came to announce that the bath was ready, breaking the awkward moment, and our main characters headed to the bathroom. But there, the maids had prepared an even more awkward surprise for them. The couple was to bathe in the same room, separated only by a thin screen. And Calcion was clearly unbothered, as he immediately took off his robe and jumped into the tub prepared for him. The girl was angry at his reaction. When a maid went to massage his shoulders, Solina grabbed her wrist, saying she didn't want anyone touching her man's body, and told everyone to get out. Once they were alone, she said she would wash the Duke's back and, ignoring his pleas for her to stop, walked towards him. She thought to herself how beautiful the man was without his clothes on. She reassured him that there was nothing to be embarrassed about being naked in the same room with her, with only a screen between them. She promised him she wouldn't do anything weird and just wanted to help him wash up. As she scrubbed his shoulders, she felt him tense up. She asked him if he had thought about what would have happened if she hadn't stepped in and sent them out. She leaned close to his ear, her warm breath tickling it, and whispered that the maids would wonder if the Duke didn't see her as a woman. The trick worked, and the man realized he had messed up. She then told him to get into character, because now that they had sent the servants away, they had to put on a show. The servants outside the door could hear everything, all the sounds of the two pleasing each other. In reality, Solina was just giving the Duke a back massage, which, to be honest, probably felt pretty good. The master came out carrying the girl, as she was tired after her hard work in the bathroom. He asked where their room was. It turned out that Miss Jeanette had arranged separate rooms for them, and they were far apart. Solina said she wanted to sleep in the same room as her man. So, without even letting the maid finish her sentence about Madame Jeanette, the Duke silently carried the girl towards his own room. The maids were completely stunned. They gathered to gossip that it might be the girl, not Madame Jeanette, who was in charge now, as the Duke had never defied her before. Once there, the girl praised Calcion, saying his acting was amazing. She was glad they had found a way to fool everyone without having to lie or act. They just had to keep doing what they did today and speak in a way that would be misunderstood. She suggested going to his room and using all her remaining energy to give him a massage. Then in the morning, she would complain about being sore after last night, and the Duke would say he told her not to overdo it. But she wouldn't listen. They could do some physical training before bed, and Solina would show him some new positions, and then they would fall asleep exhausted. The next morning, the Duke would talk about how much he loved the hot night, and how, thanks to the girl, he learned new ways his body could move. Solina was very pleased with this plan. She was excited because they had found the perfect way to deceive people, which would make them invincible. The next evening, Madame Jeanette arrived. She told the Duke she needed to speak with Miss Solina privately. She looked furious and had come all this way just to tell the girl that, starting tonight, she was to sleep in a separate room from Calcion. Solina made it clear that it was none of her business and that it was crossing a line for an etiquette teacher to interfere in the relationship of two adults. But Jeanette believed that as a loyal servant to the Duke of Lombard, she was upholding his honor, which gave her every right to do so. She could not stand by when his honor was at stake. The measure she would take would depend on how destructive Miss Solina was. She was prepared to watch her actions closely until she could bring honor to the Duke, not disgrace him. Solina told Jeanette that her lecturing was going too far. This was their private life, and it was obvious she was trying to intimidate her with those words. From a servant's perspective, it would be better if Solina acted as if she didn't care about the Duke, kept her distance, and slept in separate rooms. But she wouldn't agree to that, so Jeanette assumed she didn't care about his honor. The girl still couldn't believe how aggressive the woman was. She didn't understand how sleeping in the same room or being close would damage the Duke's reputation. If it really did damage his reputation, he would have told her to stop himself. But the madam said he couldn't possibly keep an eye on what everyone around him was doing, so it was usually her job to handle it. The girl reminded her that she was not a servant to be monitored and lectured, but a guest the Duke himself had carried in. The nitpicking of an etiquette teacher and head maid did nothing for his honor. Jeanette declared that even so, she had the right to point out mistakes that damaged the Duke's honor, which meant she could lecture anyone, regardless of their status. But our girl noticed that this treatment did not extend to the noble ladies who had previously visited the Duke, especially Miss Fiona, who had been quite outspoken with his grace. Solina hoped Jeanette understood her point and, as she left, demanded that she be treated the same as the other ladies. From now on, the woman realized she had messed up by not noticing this and had exposed herself, but she promised to be more careful in the future. For the honor of the Lenbard family and the future heir, she would never let that girl run wild. Our girl was already relaxing in the tub with her maid, Juna, talking about Solina's victory. She was glad she had put the head maid in her place. It was a bit chilly in the room, so she closed the window and sank into the hot bath. The maid realized she had forgotten a hair tie and had to go get it, promising to bring the lady something to drink as well. Solina enjoyed the peace and quiet, lost in her thoughts. Things like how much she wanted to surf the internet or the perks of this world. She was also thinking about the murderer. Solina hoped it was a girl who only knew how to use a fan, not a knife. Just as she found the most perfect position in the tub, the room suddenly went dark as the candles somehow went out. She called for the maid, but she wasn't there. A cold draft blew in, and Solina noticed the window was open. The candles must have been blown out by a strong gust of wind, but she was sure she had closed the window and no one had been near it. She was suddenly reminded of Rosalind's final threat as she saw her off, and lost in thought, she didn't immediately notice a dark, unfamiliar figure that had suddenly appeared beside her. To prevent the pervert from drowning her, she jumped out of the tub, but she couldn't escape. He grabbed her and covered her mouth with one hand. She bit his fingers, broke free, and started screaming for help, but the stranger managed to escape through the window. Just then, the Duke and his men burst into the room with their weapons drawn, having been drawn by the screams to save the girl. Solina pointed to the open window, and the man sent someone after the fleeing figure, who immediately ran to carry out the order. Answering Calcion's question, the girl said the attacker broke in almost immediately after the maid left the room. Solina stared at his furious face. He was clearly very angry about what had happened, but he didn't even ask if she was okay. Solina was exhausted after the ordeal and asked for help to get up. She would have been happy if he had just given her a hand, but the Duke even swept her up into his arms. This was unexpected. A shocked Miss Jeanette rushed over, asking what had happened and if he was all right. But he told her the target wasn't him, but his girl. Her concern quickly turned to disappointment, and she was ordered to send a maid over to help them. The main characters were already in their room, and the man was examining the bruises the girl had gotten while fighting off the assassin. Her feet were cold. Not bothering to call a servant, Calcion decided to dry her feet and treat her wounds himself. Solina was surprised and flustered by how gently he was treating her. She thought she might be starting to develop feelings for the man, but she quickly dismissed the idea. The Duke wasn't often a target, and he hadn't expected the assassin to go after the girl instead of him this time. He promised it wouldn't happen again, but Solina couldn't relax because even with guards, the killer could still be among them. So to put her at ease, the Duke suggested they analyze the details of the assassination attempt so they could be well prepared later. Since the assassin didn't use a weapon, it could mean he wanted to make it look like an accident. Solina guessed it might have been planned by the same person who killed Ariel, as they had also tried to disguise that as a suicide. The girl asked if Miss Jeanette could have hired the assassin, since she hated her and she had recently had a fight with her, even talking back to her. The Duke didn't believe his head maid would do such a thing, but it was entirely possible for Fiona and Rosalind. Or perhaps it was someone else entirely. Diane came to the couple to report that they had almost caught the culprit, but when he realized he was cornered, he killed himself. He said the guy was no amateur either. There were no witnesses and no evidence. The Duke ordered the body to be disposed of and told them to contact his inner circle to secretly bring in an investigator. Calcion said that there weren't many families in the Empire who could hire such a well-trained killer, and they all needed to be investigated for their involvement. Solina suggested getting some sleep, saying she was sure she would fall asleep right away after bravely fighting off the assassin. But she was wrong. She couldn't sleep. The memory of the event kept coming back, upsetting her. So the man asked if she was okay. She hadn't expected him to be so close and instinctively gave him a little shove with her shoulder. Since neither of them could sleep, the Duke offered to teach her swordsmanship, and she happily agreed. Solina was excited because it would allow her to better defend herself, and the physical exertion would help her feel tired and then fall asleep. They gave her a real sword, which was heavier than she had imagined, but she handled it surprisingly well. Calcion said the sword was custom-made for fighting beasts, so it was much heavier than a normal one. As requested, Solina raised the sword above her head and brought it down hard on the floor, succeeding completely. The Duke was thrilled to see her potential. She had the makings of a true knight. With proper training, she would become a formidable force. He looked like a professor who had just been handed the coolest project he could ever dream of. They were in the carriage, and Solina was complaining that her shoulders were killing her after the training. She asked for a day off, but Calcion said muscle soreness only goes away with more exercise. So from tomorrow, she would undergo even tougher training because the capital would be dangerous. The man said they would be in the capital soon, then draped his cloak over her shoulders and told her to get some sleep. They arrived towards evening. The butler greeted them, and the man told him to keep his voice down as the lady was asleep and needed to rest. The servant pointed to the lady's room, but the Duke said she would be sleeping in his room and told him to lead the way. He gently placed her on the bed and sent for a maid to look after her. Then he went to check the entire mansion to make sure his companion was safe. The steward reported to the Duke that they had thoroughly searched the mansion and strengthened security. The Duke praised their work and ordered them to reinforce the door locks, saying it's better to be safe than sorry, as someone could break in at any time. After finishing his patrol, Calcion went to bed, deciding to sleep on the girl's left side so he could react quickly in case of an intrusion. He held the beauty in his arms, telling himself it was only to protect his business partner, nothing more. When Solina woke up, she was surprised to be up so early, as the sun hadn't even risen. Still, she wished Calcion a good morning. He replied that it was too late for good morning. It turned out she had slept for a full 24 hours, and that wasn't dawn but dusk. She was starving, but to avoid making the room smell, she refused room service and decided to eat in the dining hall. At the Duke's request, for her personal safety, she went to the dining hall with a guard. Upon entering, she greeted a maid, but the maid was not friendly at all. Nevertheless, the girl asked her to bring her something to eat. She was ignored for a while, and then they placed a dirty plate with some unknown mush in front of her. Solina had originally just wanted to get some information out of the maid, but the situation had changed, and she decided to teach this little wench a lesson. She mentioned that she had planned to share the meal with the Duke, but hoped this would be enough, and thanked her for her hard work. But the maid immediately tried to snatch the plate back, claiming she didn't know they were both eating. So she would go make a meal for two and ask the guest to wait. Soon, a decent meal for two was in front of Solina. The maid had really gone all out and assured her the food was fresh. Then the girl said the Duke wasn't coming, that he had decided to rest, so she would eat here and go back, but she would be bored eating alone. So she invited the maid to join her, or rather, politely ordered her to sit down. When a maid reached for the food, she slapped her hand away, as she was not allowed to eat the master's food. So that the maid wouldn't just stare at her, Solina decided to kindly share the soup that the maid had taken such pains to prepare. After a few spoonfuls, the maid started to feel sick and apologized to Solina. Solina thought to herself that since she was apologizing, she must have a guilty conscience. Solina told the maid that, judging by her reaction, she hadn't prepared the food properly and must have added something to it. So she ordered the maid to call the steward immediately. After the steward appeared and the whole situation was explained, he immediately started covering for the maid. Even with solid arguments and facts, the guy stuck to his story, and Solina quickly saw through him. This good-looking guy must have some power, and since Calcion was rarely around, he probably thought he was the master of the house. The girl realized she couldn't handle this without Calcion's help and decided to deal with it later. But for now, she continued the debate, suggesting that the servants were like a family, as only family would cover for and protect each other like this. The steward thought to himself that the girl was stubborn, but out loud, he promised to take action on the matter later. Solina didn't like the guy, so she decided to just leave, letting him think it was all over, but revenge was coming. He breathed a sigh of relief, thinking the girl had calmed down and wished her a good rest. Afterwards, the steward reassured the maid, saying nothing bad would happen and that there would just be a formal meeting tomorrow. Not to worry, he was sure the Duke wouldn't make a big deal out of it. The next day, it was time for official business, and the steward had to apologize to the Duke. He reported that he had dealt with the maid, taught her a lesson, and simply demoted her to cleaning duties. But the Duke saw right through it, that he was deliberately being lenient with her. The steward admitted his mistake, and Calcion asked him what he thought should be done with the maid. Not wanting to go down with her, he replied that she should be kicked out of the mansion, settled on the spot. But that wasn't enough, so he added that the cost of the humiliation she caused would be deducted from her salary. The Duke confirmed if Solina agreed with this solution for the maid, but she added that since the steward had also wronged her, he should be fired too. The steward fell to his knees and began to apologize, claiming the staff was like family to him, so he defended them without thinking. He couldn't lose his position over this mistress, so he was willing to swallow his pride. But Solina claimed she saw the steward having a maid bring him public funds the night before. He started ranting that it was all slander and that there were no witnesses. But sadly for him, he found no support in the crowd, and everyone just started whispering. The Duke wanted to avoid chaos in the house, especially since he knew the steward had always been like this. If he had done the right thing from the start, Solina wouldn't have bothered him. So he decided that everyone involved in the incident would be fired. Calcion also added that he would order an additional investigation, and the more they found, the heavier the punishment would be. The two began to leave, and Solina glanced back at the steward. She had deliberately arranged everything to give him a taste of his own medicine. Soon, the two protagonists were sitting at a table, talking about how great it was to have dealt with everything at once. Perhaps the steward had treated Ariel the same way. If she was afraid to tell the Duke, the guy probably thought everyone else would stay silent too. The Duke was annoyed that this was the second time he had been backstabbed, but thanks to this incident, he had learned a lot. The Duke had fencing practice today, and Solina asked to join him, as she had only ever been able to practice in her own room. The man agreed, but she needed to change into comfortable clothes, so she went to get changed. She was already in the walk-in closet with Juna, who insisted on staying by her side at all times and begged her mistress not to ignore her help anymore. Solina felt that Juna thought she was the only one she could rely on and wondered what that was all about. The maids picked out a suitable outfit for their mistress, and Solina wanted to wear pants, but the maids started protesting because it would look common. Solina would be more comfortable training in pants. And just then, Juna started getting agitated, saying that a lady who wields a sword won't attract men. The girl didn't like how the maid disguised insults as concern, and if she kept this up, her self-esteem would be destroyed. Our girl compared Juna to an overprotective mom, but she defended herself by saying she was just worried because the capital was a scary place. Solina thought Juna was overreacting, but she decided not to make an issue of it for now, though she needed to stay on her guard. She told Juna that she felt uneasy about the servants here, but was told that everyone in the capital was that harsh. During her mistress's stay in the capital, Juna begged to stay by her side at all times, as she would take care of everything. The training was about to end, and the girl was impressed by the fierce scene. The Duke clearly had a lot of faith in his soldiers. Calcion mentioned they train every morning and apologized that she was still almost killed. The girl was eager to start training, and Dion asked what she wanted to practice. He couldn't understand how a woman with such slender arms could be good at fencing. Just then, she decided to show him the power of her slender arms. She snatched the Duke's sword and held it to Dion's throat. Instantly, Dion started defending his master, saying he couldn't believe the lady was human. Her swordsmanship was too advanced for her build, but Calcion explained that he had just been training her in his spare time. The other man was shocked that she had learned so quickly in just a few days. An attendant approached, announcing that a messenger had arrived and insisted on an urgent meeting with his lordship. The messenger said he was from the royal palace and that the queen had a letter for the duke. Solina initially thought it was about what the duke had mentioned in the carriage, that the crown prince was making a move. But she was wrong. Calcion was clearly not happy with the news and took the letter with a grim face. The letter said that Queen Meryl was planning to drop by for a visit tomorrow. She and the princess were very excited about his arrival in the capital. After reading the letter, without a second thought, he told them to inform the queen that he couldn't see her because he was unwell. Dion asked the messenger why he was so nervous. It's not like the Duke's refusal would cost him his head. He explained that the Duke always refused her with the same excuse, and the Queen might think she was being played for a fool. Then Dion suggested they tell Her Majesty that the Duke was injured during training. Just then, Calcion lunged at Solina with his sword, scaring her half to death. But she accepted the challenge with a mischievous smile. He was sure she could block the blow, so he wasn't worried about her safety at all. The other two watched the whole scene, thinking that perhaps the messenger wouldn't have to lie after all. After he left, Calcion suggested they actually spar to make things look believable. Even though he had only taught her the basics, he saw that she was doing well. So he said he wouldn't let her go until she landed a hit on him. No matter how many times the heroine swung her sword, the guy just kept blocking or deflecting her attacks. Her opponent told her she needed to learn to read his movements, but she just couldn't get it. It was difficult. But the student began to gradually adapt, and the teacher's movements no longer seemed so fast. She noticed some openings when he attacked and tried to strike at those spots. But as she moved, she lost her balance and started to fall. But the mentor reacted quickly and caught her. He advised the girl not to be fooled by the illusion of an opening. Solina immediately showed her cunning, lightly tapping her opponent's head with her sword. She laughed, repeating his words, telling the Duke not to delude himself into thinking she was defenseless. He smirked, agreeing that if this had been a real fight, he would be dead. Calcion praised the girl, calling her a genius, and said she just needed more practice to let her body remember everything. Watching them, Dion wondered if Solina's arrival had really changed the Duke, and if something was really going on between them. Solina was exhausted, complaining that the Duke was much stricter than her own personal trainer. She could already feel her muscles screaming, and she definitely wouldn't be thanking him for it tomorrow. Solina asked him why he was putting off the meeting and if the Queen was one of their suspects. He agreed, adding that she would be seeing her often from now on, but sooner or later he would have to accept her. The girl felt that this queen must be as annoying as Rosalind, but things were much easier with Fiona, who, to be honest, was like a puppy. Calcion warned her that they needed to prepare for the meeting, as the queen only seemed naive, but things weren't that simple. She would still try to set him up with the princess, so they had to be on their guard here. The man explained that his relationship with the heir to the throne was tense, even more so than with the entire royal family. The queen's title was as precarious as the heir's, so he needed to make the Duke a part of their family. To protect himself, he wanted to marry the princess off to a nobleman to gain more power, which made the Duke the perfect candidate. It seemed the queen had heard some rumors about Solina, so you can bet she definitely had it in for her. The girl started to leave, saying she needed to go prepare, as she didn't know when the queen would arrive. The Duke asked how exactly she planned to prepare, but she couldn't give a clear answer and just left. It was finally time to become a socialite. Solina and Juno were all dressed up and ready to go. They were going on a shopping spree, and the maid was very excited about the outing, picking out only the hottest shops. She said that Miss Ariel used to love shopping too, visiting all the most popular and well-known stores. Solina learned that Juno used to live in Mayong, so she decided to ask her how she came to work for the Duke. According to the girl, she was looking for a job at the time, and a friend told her there was an opening with Duke Lombard. The whole thing struck her as very suspicious, as if Juno had deliberately come to the Lombard household. Otherwise, why look for a job so far from home? But the maid brushed it off, saying she was just desperate for a job because she was poor and that she was glad it happened this way because she met Solina. The more she analyzed Juno's behavior, the more convinced she became that this maid's approach was no coincidence. And it was very likely that someone was watching her, trying to drive a wedge between her and Calcion and possibly planning to offer. "We're here," Juna shouted as the carriage stopped in front of their destination, the deity store. As she got out of the carriage, the girl decided she needed to be more careful with this maid, although she doubted she would dare to pull anything in a crowded store. They approached the main entrance, but the guard stopped them, saying the store was full. A couple of other girls walked up, and one of them turned to Solina and said, "Looks like this is your first time here," and then went inside. For some reason, those girls got in, as if they only let a select few enter. So the heroine asked the guard, "Hey, if the store is full, why did you let those ladies in?" They told her that the visit was planned in advance. But Solina countered that this was a clothing store and not a restaurant. Getting no response, she asked what tedious procedure one had to go through to be one of the chosen few allowed in. Still no answer. The girl really missed Calcion's help, but she couldn't bother him just yet. So she decided to handle it herself, telling the guard he had no right to judge whether she was worthy of entering the store. She wanted to talk to someone worth her time and demanded they call the manager. A woman came out and politely introduced herself as Diete, the store manager. She looked Solina over, thinking she was some country noble who probably hadn't heard of the store's rules. The woman guessed she was from Almania, a place that always sent some whimsical nobles. Curious to see how the girl would react to being rejected, she said she had heard about the trouble at the door. Solina said she didn't know it was a VIP store and that the problem was clearly not that she hadn't given advance notice. The manager thought the girl would get angry right away, but she didn't. So she explained that the place was more like a salon and they prioritized people they already knew. The protagonist feigned frustration, as she was to appear as Duke Linbard's partner at the next event. She didn't want to ruin the Duke's reputation, which was why she had come all the way to Mion to buy new styles. But hey, she could always go somewhere else. As soon as the manager heard the Duke's name, she decided to bend the rules, saying she would do what she could for the girl. She reminded her that the store was already full, so it might be a bit crowded. Solina walked into the store, and she could clearly hear the other customers constantly gossiping about her behind her back. She sat on a sofa, and it was clear she wasn't happy about the eye rolls, but she felt it was good practice for her. The protagonist flipped through the magazine they gave her. The outfits were completely different from the Northern style, but she liked them. Without a second thought, she closed the book and announced that she would buy all of their dresses. As the manager stood there confused, another wave of gossip spread among the other customers. The price tags on these dresses. The girl didn't care, because Duke Linbard would be paying. She even made some requests, like wanting certain styles in multiple colors and perhaps with floral prints. The woman realized this lady was planning a complete wardrobe overhaul, and business was about to boom. Cha-ching. She said they had some ready-made designs and suggested she try them on. As the staff bustled around her, she thought to herself that this place ran entirely on money, and it was the only way to get people to actually work. They finished with the dress, and Solina came out to show everyone how she looked. Everyone was stunned by her appearance, and she enjoyed the reaction. She had captured their attention and started the rumors she needed. Solina loved the dress and wanted it as soon as possible. The manager promised she would have it before lunch. The lady said she would be back later and was about to leave when a guy stopped her, startling the girls. He introduced himself as Smith, the second son of Baron Shade. She had never heard of him before. Since she didn't have a seat, the bold fellow decided to invite her to sit with him. Solina noticed his attire was plainer than those at the center table, which probably meant he wasn't a big shot. If she sat there, it would mean she was on the same level as them, so she politely declined. But Smith didn't give up and tried to at least get her name. She felt like an antelope trapped in a lion's den. Solina explained that her man, Calcion, was very jealous and that she could only really meet him properly when he was present. At the mention of the guy, the young man immediately backed off and apologized for bothering her. Juna was very excited about Solina's look, saying that when she appeared at the reception, everyone would be stunned. The heroine decided to change the subject and asked how Miss Ariel used to act. According to the maid, Ariel was melancholic at first, but then she suddenly started flirting with everyone. Solina couldn't connect these two sides of her. She also said that the bride-to-be was also not allowed into some places at first, but then she ordered 5 dresses from the store and everything changed. Juna apologized for not reminding her that not everyone could get into the store, but the girl took it as an admission that it was a setup. The maid suggested going somewhere else, but Solina refused, saying she was tired and wanted to relax. She pointed to a flower shop, saying she would rest there while Juna could scout out a place that would have them. The girl clearly didn't want to go alone, but her mistress didn't want to go through that stress again. So she decided her assistant could handle it, as nothing was impossible for her, even if that was nonsense. An hour later, she ran back, saying she had found this place called the Rumor Joint, but didn't know if it was any good, because she had never been there. Solina was speechless, thinking about how hard it must have been for Ariel back then, how scared she must have been. Putting all the clues together, she made a list of reasons and suspects for the former bride's death, but maybe no one wanted her dead at all, and it was just an accident. A man who was also with them pulled her out of her jumbled thoughts. The girl suggested they go to Rumors, but he had called her over for something else. An urgent message had just arrived from His Grace. The message mentioned the Queen's visit, which meant they had to go back as soon as possible. When Solina returned, she saw something that bothered her greatly. The Duke at first looked normal. He was exercising, which was fine, but he didn't look sick at all, and the Queen was arriving soon. As a professional actress, she couldn't let this slide, so she decided to turn this athlete into a patient right away. She picked out the right clothes, put a wet towel on him, and did the whole 9 yards. But the Duke still didn't look sick, just ridiculously handsome. But the problem wasn't her work, it was that he looked too healthy, like he had never been sick a day in his life. It turned out that Calcion had never really been sick, never been bedridden with a fever, at least not that he could remember. He couldn't afford to be sick, he had a job to do, responsibilities to fulfill, so he didn't even know how to pretend to be sick. She had always thought that nobles were raised delicately. She felt sorry for the Duke, and placed her hand on his head to comfort him. The guy completely misunderstood the gesture, and was quite flustered by the touch. But then he got used to it, and started saying that if you overcome one problem, eventually the whole world will be at your feet. To Solina, it sounded like some kind of famous quote. She didn't know what to say, just patted his head and praised him. Like a child, she sat in a chair, stretched well, and yawned, not hiding her exhaustion. Then the Duke suggested she take a nap, saying the Queen wouldn't come in without permission and he would wake her when needed. He didn't have to say it twice. She immediately started unceremoniously pushing the patient aside. She told him to wake her up in 5 minutes, saying she would wake up instantly, but she was dead asleep before she could even finish her sentence. The man watched the sleeping beauty, noticing that this woman didn't stress him out at all. On the contrary, he was getting used to her. Just then, a servant entered the room, bowed to his master, and announced that the Queen had arrived. This meant it was time to wake Solina. The Duke reached out to her, about to call her name, but stopped. He pulled his hand back and, almost abruptly, lay back down on the bed, playing dead or asleep. The servant was confused by this, but the master said he was unwell and told him to announce to others that he was asleep. An hour later, Solina sat up with her eyes wide open and began to complain that they had let her oversleep. But the guy was just following her orders. A patient needs rest, doesn't he? Seeing her terrible state, Solina almost cried. Just as Calcion had seen, her dress was wrinkled and her hair was a mess. The Queen had arrived with the princess, though he didn't even want to think about it. While getting ready, Solina imagined the Queen to be a super strict person. Only then did the Duke have the servant tell the Queen that he was ready to see her. A kind-faced lady entered the room and greeted him politely, with a little girl standing beside her. Our heroine's jaw nearly dropped in shock. You might have thought there were 2 princesses standing there, as the Queen looked even younger than her. The Queen came because she heard rumors of the Duke's illness, but in her opinion, he didn't look sick at all. She made eye contact with Solina and blurted out her guess. The Duke had refused to see her because he was busy with this woman. He insisted he was very unwell, which was why he couldn't receive guests, and apologize for it. The Queen accepted the apology. She had come uninvited just to see if the guy was really sick. The heroine thought the Queen was shrewd and frank, but it was hard to believe her sincerity. There had to be a catch. The girl curtsied to the guests, offering a polite greeting as one does upon a first meeting. The lady in the hat said the young lady was surprisingly pale and that she had never seen such beauty. Solina didn't know how to act in front of the Queen, who clearly noticed her nervousness. She saw the girl, trembling, and asked if she was shaking in fear that the Queen would kill her. The woman was amused by the girl's reaction. It was fun to tease her before the wedding, but she reassured her that she would neither kill nor harm her. The heroine was baffled. She didn't understand why the other would bring up killing. From the sound of it, she must have spoken with Ariel. To clarify which wedding, the Queen said the Duke was planning to marry, and it would be wonderful if he could marry Jeriel. She was so blunt about marriage in front of a child that Solina blurted out she planned to be with the Duke for the rest of her life. Meryl asked if that guy thought so too, but he felt it was better to let things be. He He wasn't considering marriage at the moment and was sure of his feelings. But the queen reminded him that things don't always go as you wish. She turned to Solina and told her not to rely on her feelings, even though Solina thought it was important to listen to one's heart. The queen found the idea cute, but the problem was that love and marriage are two different things, and marriage is for adults. Solina felt the princess was too young for all this, but according to the queen, some young people act like adults. To convince Solina that Jeriel really wanted to marry the Duke, she asked the girl herself. Solina didn't like them asking a 10-year-old child such a question. She probably didn't even understand what it meant. But they didn't have to wait long, as the princess answered the question with a yes, looking both shy and timid. The heroine flew into a rage, grabbed the girl's shoulders, and told her to think it over again, as the Duke was twice her age. She didn't care at all that Calcion was present and just kept trying to convince the child that he was an old, ugly, and stupid guy. The girl whispered softly, yet delivered a fatal blow. The Duke of the North is extremely handsome. Then she said even louder that he wasn't old at all and was the perfect age for marriage. She thought he was handsome no matter what. This girl was utterly obsessed with him. Solina completely understood that kind of girlish crush, but she still thought the girl needed to seriously reconsider. She spoke to her calmly, trying to convey the idea that feelings should be mutual. The princess wondered. No matter how many times she asked the Duke about his feelings, he never answered. She was sure he would eventually fall in love with her. But her friend shattered her fantasy. The man's heart already belonged to her. Just then, the princess started throwing a tantrum, screaming that she was prettier, richer, and of higher status. The Duke didn't need Solina to be the best in every way to fall in love with her. They both knew their meeting was fated. Jeriel felt their relationship was like something out of a romance novel, which nearly broke her. The girl just couldn't accept reality, so she kept saying through her tears that it wasn't true. Calcion thought the queen should find someone better than him, but she didn't know who else could protect her and the princess after the crown prince ascended the throne. Besides, the princess had feelings for the guy, and the queen thought she would be a good match. The heroine listened to their conversation, knowing she couldn't just stand by and had to do something. But before she could speak, Calcion interrupted, declaring that he didn't want to marry for benefits. Meryl never expected to hear such words from him. This was something a man in love would say. Solina didn't believe it. The Duke would say anything to avoid marrying the princess. The queen glanced at the girl and told her not to get her hopes up, as this wouldn't last long. She asked the Duke if he was going to the party with that woman, and he confirmed her suspicion. Meryl hoped Solina wouldn't get too deep into high society, as it wasn't safe there. The girl was terrified, thinking she might be killed, but they assured her the queen wouldn't go that far. But who would do the deed remained a mystery, because even if the queen didn't know, she felt there were plenty of people who would. The woman was ready to leave, as it was getting late, and she had been visiting the sick for too long. She said she would come again when he was better. Only the two of them were left in the room. Solina shared her thought that the queen might be hinting at something, and the guy agreed with her intuition. The heroine doubted if this woman was involved, as she was too calm and her acting was too realistic. But let's not forget, the queen was always meddling in Ariel and Calcion's relationship. If the girl committed suicide, the queen surely had something to do with it. The Duke pointed out that Ariel's wound was too deep for her to have inflicted it herself. Although Solina was new to high society, she still didn't think the former fiancé was killed just because someone didn't like her. She wasn't saying it was suicide, just considering all angles. You know, since she was eager to find clues, the Duke suggested checking Ariel's room. Perhaps going inside would spark some inspiration. He offered his arm, as if to say, "Shall we go?" After a pause, she agreed. Entering the room where she died might end this matter more quickly. As they walked down the hallway, Solina noticed the atmosphere on this side was much better. The Duke explained that his mother used to live in the West Wing, so her touch was everywhere. She liked the terrace they walked onto and the stairs that led directly to the garden. According to him, the place was designed for secret trysts from the beginning. Since the Duchess had fulfilled her duty by producing an heir, her husband didn't care. The Duke didn't think much of it, as this was how most high society couples behaved. The two arrived at the center of the West Wing, where the bright and colorful interior caught the girl's eye, reminding her of the Duchess's personality. As Calcion himself said, Ariel had also lived here, but she had barely made any changes to the room. They came to a door that led to a small room where the maids lived, which was also where Miss Jeanette had once stayed. On that fateful day, she was there, but she said she heard nothing because she was fast asleep. Calcion recalled and described what the dead girl looked like. The windows and doors were locked, and the only way into the room was through where Jeanette slept. But her door was also locked that night, so the killer couldn't have passed through there, and Jeanette became the prime suspect. Her motive was that Ariel was unworthy of the man's family status. But it would be a disgrace for Miss Jeanette to be involved in a murder, so it was unlikely she would do such a thing. Calcion had said several times that, judging by the victim's wounds, the killer was someone who had held a knife more than once. Solina felt that person must have been very strong. Perhaps if the girl had really wanted to harm herself, she could have done it on her own. So she proposed her theory to the Duke. If this were true, then the person who drove her to the edge is the real culprit. The Duke agreed, saying the criminal could be anyone who had spoken to her, and my God, it could even have been Calcion himself, and he had been oblivious to it until now. This realization hit him hard. He just covered his face and sank down. He felt genuinely guilty because on that day, he had only focused on what happened and who did it, and not on Ariel's death. He wondered how she had thought of it, but she just said it came to her suddenly. You might think she had experienced something similar, but according to her, she hadn't. Anyone can have that feeling that they don't belong in this world. There wasn't a specific person who made Solina feel that way, just some strangers who spoke ill of her and spread lies. The girl struggled a lot back then, but she eventually won and became a famous actress. Calcion listened intently to Solina, and something seemed to stir within him. He told her that she shouldn't have to endure anything. In this world, she could tell him everything. She shouldn't have to fight alone. The heroine smiled gently, amused by the possibility that if she told him everything, he might hunt those people down and punish them. The Duke thought for a second, then confirmed that if it were a viable option, he would do it. Solina first lowered her head, then began to object, saying you can't just kill people because they're bad. The man didn't kill for that reason, but he had been in territorial disputes where such outcomes were inevitable. And because of that, he could now clearly defend his interests. So he asked the lady not to endure any injustice against her, because in this world, she had him. The next day, Solina received a letter from a shop. They had made a mistake that prevented them from sewing the clothes and asked the girl to visit again. She showed the letter to the Duke, who was furious at the disrespect. Not only did they make a mistake, but they couldn't even come in person. Even though the girl paid them a considerable fee, they sent a letter like this. She suddenly realized that someone was behind this, and the letter was a declaration of war. So she frantically prepared to go to the shop, making it clear that she accepted the challenge. Strangely, Miss Fiona was also there, and neither of them expected to run into the other. Fiona noticed she was angry and asked what she was doing here, and the girl snapped back that there was no rule forbidding her from coming. Looking at Solina, the lady thought to herself that this place was full of bad news. Honestly, she thought the girl was as crazy as ever. She just retorted sarcastically, not taking her seriously at all. But then she remembered that Fionel might know something important, so she rudely dragged her aside to talk. To keep her maids from following, she made it clear that if they didn't listen, they would regret it. Solina slammed her against the wall and said bluntly that she obviously knew something about Ariel's death. She asked again what she knew, because she knew a lot about her. Fiona had threatened Solina more than once, saying she would end up just like the Duke's former fiancé. Solina had even heard that she had suddenly committed suicide. So Solina asked if she knew why the girl did it, because Fiona exuded an extremely dangerous aura. But this didn't break Fiona. She just went into defense mode, screaming that she knew nothing. This time Solina let her go, but thought to herself that she would need to pressure Fiona again later to get everything she knew out of her. After getting to a safe distance, Fiona shouted at Solina, claiming that she had been honest with her, unlike the other woman. But the heroine didn't care, because that didn't change the fact that the Duke belonged to her. After that sore spot was touched, Fiona indignantly accused the girl of being despicable. She didn't want to have anything to do with them. She told her rival that she was actually a good person. Honestly, Solina agreed with her a little in her heart. Fiona was a decent person, but she was the way she was because she knew how terrible the nobility could be. This was a small warning for Solina. There were people worse than Fiona. After collecting her thoughts, she and Juna finally walked into the shop. The manager was already there, apologizing for calling the girl over so suddenly and thanking her for coming. Solina could see the girl in front of her was trembling for some reason. Something was definitely wrong. Suddenly, a customer chimed in, saying you can't pressure the staff like that. The manager explained they were short-staffed and couldn't come to her personally and apologized again. But the girl had enjoyed her shopping yesterday, so she didn't mind coming again at all. The Duke also read the letter Solina received, and he was angry because it meant she wouldn't be giving him the attention he wanted. A murmur went through the room, clearly showing the surrounding people's disapproval of the girl. The girl herself seemed to hear none of the gossip. Her eyes were locked on one person. She didn't even have to guess who was behind this. Rosalind herself was sitting there, sipping tea as if nothing was wrong. The protagonist pulled up a chair and greeted her casually, pretending as if they hadn't seen each other in a long time. Rosalind couldn't return the same enthusiasm. She just couldn't stand that flippant attitude. Frankly, she didn't have time to chat with a commoner. She was a noble and had to watch her words. Some unknown lady whispered in Rosalind's ear, suggesting Solina was foolish and lacked manners. The whispers in the hall continued. Everyone present found the heroine to be vulgar. Meanwhile, Solina was thinking that this was exactly the kind of behavior that could have driven Ariel to suicide. Even for her, a professional actress, this was tough. She knew it was pointless to argue with these people. She was at a disadvantage. Solina couldn't argue back at Rosalind and thought that if she were the villain, she would just resort to some heavy-handed tactics to win. Just as she had hoped, the Duke himself suddenly appeared behind her, right on time. He was radiating a murderous aura. It seemed he had overheard something he shouldn't have. No one in the hall expected him, neither Rosalind nor Solina. Rumors started spreading through the room again. The guy had been worried sick about her coming alone, so he decided to follow. He pulled the lady to his side and announced to the entire hall that she was his guest, invited by him. He wanted everyone to get that into their stupid heads. He also pointed out that one person in particular should know this better than anyone, as he turned to Rosalind. But she retorted that the Duke never introduced her as a guest, so she assumed Solina was his woman, the kind without any sense of propriety. A woman to warm the Duke's bed. Calcion scoffed that she could only come up with something like that, but perhaps it was inherited from her father, the guy who was always fooling around with his mistresses. That's why Rosalind could only think that way, he thought. But the Duke was nothing like her father. Then he turned to the crowd and said that he was serious about Solina, which was why he brought her here. So he thought others should take this lady seriously as well. After that, the two left the shop, with Rosalind once again left with nothing, just like last time. The heroes sat in the carriage, the guy practically radiating a thunderstorm of anger. It was obvious he was angry, but Solina wanted to double-check. It turned out he had good reason to be in a bad mood, as the Duke saw how they treated his person. Moreover, he saw how the letter she received in the morning upset her. She was on edge the whole time. Calcion asked Solina why she came, knowing what would happen, and if she was really ready to handle all this. The Duke reminded her of what he said yesterday about not putting up with that kind of treatment. But she started making excuses, saying she didn't mean to. It was just that the Duke happened to show up, right, when she was about to show her strength. She endured all the insults because she wanted to break into high society. But the guy said she didn't need to do that. Then Solina reminded him that this was exactly why she was here. Because the Duke wanted to find a psycho who murdered Ariel. But he disagreed, because even without a killer, he was trying to find out why it happened, and she didn't need to go through the same thing as the victim for that. And since the two of them are different, Solina needed to find another way to fit into the elite circle. She almost said something about Ariel, but Calcion cut her off, ending the topic. She didn't need to get close to those people. He didn't want anyone else to get hurt because of him. So he just told her to be herself. In her world, Solina always had to do as others said, and it felt awful. But this cold man before her said the words she had always dreamed of hearing. Now she realized that as an actress, she was used to enduring trash and meaningless criticism. She had ignored the disrespect for too long, but it was just as hard for her as it was for anyone else. She really needed to pull herself together, wipe her tears, and pretend she didn't care. But then the Duke hugged her. He thought it might calm her down. After that, Solina found it hard to call herself an actress anymore, because Calcion could see right through her. He reminded her that he had practiced martial arts, so seeing through people was perfectly normal for him. After this encouragement, the girl felt much better, thinking the Duke was in top form today and had performed perfectly. Now no one would doubt his sincerity towards Solina, so we don't have to worry about his acting anymore. He was so convincing in that moment that even this actress believed his words were true. But Calcion said those words were all true, which shocked her. It was hard to believe he would marry just for a deal. Solina didn't know the guy felt that way about her, but the problem was they were from different worlds, and she had to go back eventually. She couldn't just abandon everything she had over there, even though it was nice to hear those words. She was about to say something about the wedding, but they interrupted her. The Duke froze at the word, as he had no idea what she was talking about. Then they both fell silent. But the girl continued, explaining that usually when people say serious, they mean marriage. When the guy realized he had just told everyone he wanted to marry Solina, his cheeks turned red. So basically, he had confessed his feelings to the girl. But she quickly reassured him that his acting had improved, that he had done everything right, even perfectly. But he just couldn't shake off the shame. The heroine immediately chimed in, wanting to know what he really meant by a serious relationship. They had been through so much together. She couldn't possibly be just a nobody to the Duke. Regardless of the outcome of this hunt for the killer, he would support Solina and ensure her safety. The heroine was moved by these words. It was clear he had thought about it deeply, so she thanked him for his concern. But what really excited him was the idea of her fencing skills. The Duke's eyes lit up at the thought. Calcion said she had real talent and he could teach her more. But she refused. She didn't want the training to become his new obsession, as she already felt she couldn't put down the damn sword. Then the heroine suggested they go shopping together to get the rumor of them being a couple spreading. She decided to start with Kranga, as she had long wanted to visit the pastry shop Juna frequented. When Solina and the Duke showed up at that place together, they were suddenly given the best seats in the house. Although it was completely expected, the difference in treatment was too much. With Juna not around, she called over a waiter. She didn't have much of a sweet tooth herself, but still asked him to recommend some popular desserts. The guy took her order with great enthusiasm, telling her to wait a few minutes and promising to bring her something she would like. So they wouldn't just be sitting there idly, they were served some small snacks. He said they were sweet, but not cloying, and no wonder this place was so popular. She was excited and ready to dig in. But the Duke stopped her, asking to taste it first in case someone had poisoned the food. Calcion had been trained for this since he was a child, so his body was resistant to most poisons. What a rough childhood. But she agreed anyway, and the brave hero closed his eyes and took the first bite. After chewing thoughtfully for a moment, the Duke's eyes shot wide open. He looked as if he'd been poisoned, but he only said that it was super sweet. His expression was easy to misunderstand, but he just told her not to eat it. She agreed, then forked a new piece and put it in his mouth for him to taste. It turned out to be sickeningly sweet too. Solina didn't want any accidents, so the Duke tasted everything, but they all turned out to be nauseatingly sweet. She was frustrated that she couldn't eat anything, and it seemed they would just have to leave. But just then, the waiter came over with their order. They had specially made a sugar-free cake for the two of them and asked them to try it right away. She liked the look of the cake, so she forked a piece and brought it to Calcion's lips to feed him. Everyone around them fell silent in shock. After savoring the full flavor of the dessert, he decided it was the most delicious thing he had ever eaten. So she decided to try it too. The cake was indeed not sweet, and its flavor was very delicate. She looked up at him, not understanding why he was staring at her like that, his eyes wide and his cheeks slightly flushed. Then she saw the fork and remembered she had just used it to feed the Duke, finally understanding his reaction. Our main characters have returned to the ducal mansion, and Solina was trying our new look. The designers were nearly moved to tears by her beauty while she waited for Calcion's opinion. She wanted to know if she could completely outshine all the socialites at the royal reception. The main characters saw off the designers, who were preparing to return, and wished them a safe journey. For once, Solina was in a good mood after shopping. It felt good that no one was trying to scheme against her. The girl liked some of the jewelry, but she was more interested in the shop's exquisite design. When Calcion offered to buy her something, Solina showed him the huge pile of things they had already bought. But that wasn't what he meant. He proposed buying the shop itself. He did have a lot of cash on hand, as he needed it to cover the duchy's expenses. Now the girl understood why people looked at her that way. when they heard the Duke's name. But she couldn't run the shop anyway, because she didn't officially exist here. But it turned out the Duke had already drafted a document from the moment Solina entered the castle that confirmed her identity. As long as she was here, she could purchase any building just by putting it under the Lindbergh family name. So Solina was now officially living in the ducal mansion, even though she didn't plan on staying in this world for long. She had thought this was all a dream, but now she could clearly see and feel that she was living in the real world. Just as the Duke said, the document might still be valid when she returned to her own world. There was no getting rid of it because the fact that she belonged to the Duke wouldn't just disappear into thin air. The perfect couple had already set off for the castle. Calcion said that guests had to arrive before the royal family, and if they were late, they could even be accused of treason. Hearing this, she started to worry about being late. But the Duke didn't want to arrive too early either. She peeked out the window, wondering why there were so many carriages on the road. It looked like a damn war. They both looked in the same direction. She was checking the crests on the carriages, which belonged to families she recognized. The scene she saw made her think that these families were fighting each other over who would arrive first. So this time, the main characters would have to join the battle. But for now, they could only go with the flow like everyone else. Suddenly, the carriage they were in jolted violently. Solina almost fell and was startled. Worried about her, Calcion moved closer and asked if she was all right. He went outside, where Dion told him there was a problem with the carriage wheel, and the coachman was already checking it. Soon, the coachman himself came over with something in his hand and said that a wire had gotten tangled in the wheel. He had checked the carriage before they left, but hadn't looked underneath, as that was something done during regular inspections. Solina was just glad no one was hurt. Although it was too late to call for a new carriage, she went to the Duke and asked if they could just ride there on horseback. He said it wasn't forbidden, especially since many nobles like to show off their style this way. That was more or less the answer she expected. She suggested they both go on horseback. So the Duke told Dion to prepare the horses, and he left immediately to do so. Solina's riding skills were professional level. After all, she was an actress, so a dress was no obstacle for her. The horses were ready, and she mounted her horse with extreme grace. Dion was stunned. He had thought the lady would ride with the Duke. He had completely forgotten how skilled she was with the sword. She told him that she and the Duke would go on ahead, and the rest should follow. Calcion pointed out that besides Lady Orlean, Solina was the first noble lady to arrive on horseback. This lady had distinguished herself in battle since she was young and thus earned the title of Countess. Her achievements on the battlefield were outstanding, and no one could match her spirit. Solina was fired up by this image. The Duke said the Countess would be at the banquet, but wouldn't stay long because she hated noisy crowds. It seemed nothing in the world could capture our girl's attention, but she couldn't wait to meet this person. She was really fitting in here, and realizing it would make leaving that much harder. The two of them were almost there. They could already see figures ahead, which must be the main gate. They sped up to get there. The guards were counting heads, preparing to close the gates. But one of them saw Duke Lindbergh approaching, so they waited patiently. After they arrived, the young Duke offered the lady his hand to help her dismount. The Duke introduced himself and the lady by his side, and they were welcomed. As the couple walked forward, a buzz went through the crowd, with the ladies all talking about the main characters. Solina thought the reaction was pretty good, and she was glad everything was going smoothly so far. Lady Fiona approached them, saying she had missed the Duke and was worried something had happened to their carriage. She thought they weren't coming. She was so happy to see him and wanted him to promise her a dance later. But Solina shattered her fantasy, pointing out that the gentleman had come with her. She wished Fiona luck finding a partner and then pulled the Duke away to get something to eat. Calcion praised her, saying she handled that woman perfectly. She replied that she could handle anyone. Just then, Lady Rosalind appeared beside them, politely greeting the Duke and mentioning she'd heard her name in their conversation. Solina just said she missed her, and the lady was glad to confirm that the couple was doing well. Our heroine pointed out to Rosalind that she was again pretending not to know her name, even though they had spoken more than once. Another girl suddenly appeared next to her, greeting everyone present and saying it was a pleasure to see them all. She introduced herself as Laurel and mentioned that she and the Duke had met last year on Foundation Day. Solina figured this girl must be with Rosalind, since she appeared just as she was starting to go after Rosalind. Calcion and Laurel were still standing there exchanging pleasantries. Solina noticed something was off about this lady. She looked like she was suddenly flirting with him. It seemed she thought Solina was playing dumb, but Solina knew exactly what she was doing. So she she just went ahead and staked her claim. With a gesture, the Duke introduced his companion and said he hoped she would accompany him to future events. Laurel got the hint. She understood the message and immediately backed off. She was gloating over this victory. 100 more girls like that could come, and she would take them all down. After that, the Duke was like a broken record, saying the same thing to every woman. He had a partner and hoped they would find their own. Solina was getting a little tired of being the center of attention, but Calcion comforted her, saying that now that the royals had arrived, no one else would be coming over. Finally, the guests were told that the queen and princess were about to make their grand entrance. And my God, what they were wearing was stunning. But not all the royals were present. The Duke mentioned that the king was not in his right mind, so events like this were too much for him. Now she understood why the queen was in a hurry to find a husband for her daughter, lest the king pass the throne to someone irrelevant. The princess and the queen were basically ruling the country together, sharing all the responsibilities. The crown prince wouldn't get the throne. His attitude had made him too many enemies. She wondered if the Duke was like him, but he said they were completely different. Larson wasn't just hot-headed, he was downright cruel. Solina thought that maybe this was why the princess wasn't popular either, and that she might inherit the throne after the crown prince. Larson and the queen were not on good terms, so he usually avoided appearing with her. Calcion told her that after the royal dance, the banquet itself would begin, so the whole thing was almost over. The queen captured everyone's attention and announced the star of the ball, but she was not feeling well, so the princess would dance in her stead. Since there were no royal men present tonight, they needed a gentleman to lead the princess in this dance. You didn't have to be a genius to see that the queen was now hinting at Calcion. So Solina decided to act fast, grabbing his hand and running. They had to disappear before the queen could call his name. They hid in a corner. The Duke couldn't have turned down that dance. If he had refused, people would have gotten the wrong idea. She could hear the music, so they probably hadn't looked for him and had found someone else to dance with. All this time, Calcion had been trying to get Solina's attention, but she was too close to the guy to hear him. She apologized and tried to step back, but she slipped and ended up pressing even closer against him. Both of them were super embarrassed by the situation. Just then, they heard applause from inside, so they decided to go back. On the way, she tried to calm herself down. She just needed to forget what had just happened between them. She thought the Duke hadn't given it a second thought, but when she saw his reddened ears, her face turned even redder. Inside, they were standing and talking with a man Solina had never seen before. It turned out to be Baron Zion. He still couldn't get over the death of his daughter, Ariel. He wanted to talk to Calcion about something and asked for a moment alone. So she decided to leave them and get something to eat. The man asked the lady not to leave the ballroom, even though there were many guards around. The girl stood not far away with a glass in her hand, wondering what the two men were talking about. She figured the man probably hated the sight of her, since she had basically taken his daughter's place. Suddenly, a guy who appeared out of nowhere interrupted her thoughts, complimenting her choice of wine and saying she had good taste. Then a torrent of information started pouring out of his mouth, all sorts of unasked-for nonsense, praising the wine like an expert. Thanks to Lady Jeanette's teachings, she couldn't even just tell him to shut up. She had to play the part of a proper young lady. The guy's compliments were endless. He was clearly drunk and didn't know what he was doing. Then he suggested she accompany him to an empty room where they could be completely alone. That was the last straw for Solina. She was ready to throw all of Jeanette's teachings out the window and, in her own sweet and simple way, make him disappear from her sight. He scurried away quickly, but another man immediately took his place, sticking to her like glue, but she got rid of him too. Yet another man came up to her, but Solina was already an expert at rejecting these pests. Solina was getting tired of these men hitting on her, even though they knew she had come with Calcion. A lady standing nearby laughed, saying the girl's skill at rejecting people was top-notch. She introduced herself as Viral of the royal family, saying she couldn't help but laugh at the scene and apologized if she seemed rude. Solina sized up the lady, guessing her family was like Fiona's and wondering if she was about to be challenged. So she introduced herself as well. The girl already knew of Solina from her dramatic entrance at the reception and was very impressed by it. Viral had a good vibe. She offered her a drink, as alcohol washes away all bad memories. The girls toasted to the grand entrance, and the people around them happily raised their glasses too. One girl proposed a toast to her horse, because her white mare named Sina had finally given birth. Viral congratulated the lucky owner, and then everyone toasted together to some stranger's horse, Cena. Solina felt this group just loved to drink and would use any excuse. But it was better than the people she had encountered earlier. She was trapped in the middle of it, so she soon joined in with a bottle in hand, ready to toast to overflowing glasses. It was certainly fun, but compared to our heroine, these folks were lightweights, and in the end, she drank them all under the table. She was just glad the scene was relatively calm. She needed to get out for some fresh air to clear her head. She figured Calcion would be talking with Ariel's father for a while, so she decided to slip out alone. Even though the Duke had told her not to wander off, she did so anyway and started looking for the restroom. The hallway was dark and had a creepy, scary vibe, which sent her imagination running wild. Suddenly, a familiar voice called out to her. It was Fiona, who thought Solina was incredibly bold to be wandering around here alone. Our girl grabbed Fiona by the hair and dragged her towards the restroom, as she needed to have a chat with her. Fiona was about to ask what she wanted to talk about, but Solina cut her off so she could relieve herself without ruining her image. She told the girl to imagine it was the sound of a babbling brook. Fiona was furious at being treated this way, as if she were some kind of bathroom attendant. The fact that the Duke had chosen someone like Solina was driving her crazy, and she said that stirring up trouble would not end well. But she stopped herself there. This wasn't the first time, so our girl decided to find out what Fiona knew that she was so afraid of letting slip. Rosalind, Fiona, and even the Queen had warned her that her life was in danger, but Fiona just wouldn't talk. It all felt strange because everyone connected to the Duke was telling her she was going to die. A thought crossed her mind. Maybe they actually knew how Ariel died. Solina asked Fiona why she said she would die if she thought Ariel's death was a suicide, while Fiona didn't know why she did it. Worry and fear were written all over her face. It was unclear why she was scared. Maybe she was even being threatened. Suddenly, Fiona spoke. She decided to come clean, saying she didn't care if Solina lived or died. In fact, she was just worried about the Duke's reputation. But Solina said he could take care of himself. This was why Fiona couldn't stand Solina. Because she didn't love the Duke like Fiona did, she was afraid the girl's greed would get her killed. They had talked before about Ariel dying because of greed, but that meant something different, perhaps a marriage of convenience. Fiona couldn't stand talking to Solina for long. She was driving her crazy, so she just told her to be careful of men. After that, she didn't want to say any more and stormed out of the room. That advice made her wonder if the timid and quiet Ariel had a man. She remembered Juna saying the former fiancé had a lover. So after getting engaged to Calcion, Ariel found another man in the capital, and the first man didn't care, as most noble couples live that way. One lover wasn't enough reason to break off an engagement, so something worse must have happened. Something that made Lady Janet break down and kill the girl. She wasn't stupid enough to commit such an obvious murder, so she probably conspired with the killer or just stood by and watched the girl kill herself. Solina decided that if that was the case, she should pay closer attention to the men. Now she knew which direction her investigation should take. Our heroine was late returning to the banquet, but as she walked into the hallway, she realized she was completely lost. She blamed it all on Fiona, who knew she wouldn't be able to find her way back, and so slipped away first. But our girl didn't panic. I mean, she had survived an attack. At least, that's what she thought, until a strange voice startled her. It was a handsome man asking if she was all right. In her head, she was already marveling at how incredibly handsome he was. She told him she got lost on her way back from the restroom and that the person she was with had ditched her. The man guessed she wasn't familiar with the palace, saying everyone gets lost when they first come here. He offered to escort her back, for which she was very grateful, guessing he probably worked here and wasn't just attending the banquet. The man chuckled. Yes, you could say that, but he was already late for work today. He said he would definitely go to the reception later, but he had to take care of some official business first. They reached her destination, and she invited him in, but he still had things to finish. But he promised to be back before the main event started. After they parted, the heroine started thinking about how elegant, handsome, and likable that man was. Just then, the Duke appeared, wanting to know where his companion had run off to, saying it was dangerous to be alone. He was worried because he saw her drag Fiona somewhere, and then Fiona came back alone. He thought she and Solina were supposed to have left together. She found the idea crazy, but didn't press the issue, telling him she had met a man in the hallway. Her words were cut off by the announcement that the crown prince was about to appear, though he hadn't shown up yet. The Duke pressed Solina again about who she met in the hallway, and she pointed the person out. Calcion followed her finger which was pointing right at the Crown Prince. Meanwhile, the Crown Prince was giving a speech, saying they would soon become the most powerful kingdom in history. They would crush anyone who stood in their way. The Crown Prince spoke as if he were already king. He raised his glass, urging everyone to toast to the kingdom of Eklund, and everyone happily raised their glasses. Seeing this performance, Solina realized things were serious. The Crown Prince had powerful backing. The Duke pressed her, confirming if she had really run into the Crown Prince in the hallway. She confirmed it, saying he was very kind. Calcion didn't buy the kind act, as the Crown Prince was a completely different person. He had once framed a servant for murder and then had them killed. The heroine thought that no matter how terrible this guy's character was, there was no denying he was as handsome as Prince Charming. Calcion felt she was talking a bit too much about the Crown Prince's looks, so he turned away dramatically, clearly showing he was annoyed. The girl certainly didn't want to offend the Duke, so she asked him not to be angry, because he was much more handsome. This compliment brought a smile to the Duke's face and a blush to his cheeks. The girl found the whole scene adorable. Then, the heroine suggested they dance, as they were attracting too much attention and needed to make their act more convincing. The man put his arm around her waist and led her in the dance. The two of them gave off a great vibe to those around them. Solina enjoyed the feeling of being led by him in the dance. The Duke had a natural talent for it, and he was a quick learner, never missing a single detail, and his every move expressed his care for his partner. For our girl, this dance with the Duke was the best part of the whole damn party, and she happily told him so. Those words were music to his ears. It was a great honor to hear her say that. Soon, the music faded, and they bowed to each other, signaling the end of the dance. The Crown Prince came down the stairs, clapping. He had enjoyed the dance and thought they looked good together. They bowed to the royal member as a sign of respect. Still, she was a bit surprised that he would come over to them first. She introduced herself, reminding him that they had bumped into each other in the hallway earlier. She mentioned that this was her first time at the royal palace and was about to say more, but the prince interrupted her, saying he knew who she was, calling her the mountain bird of Lemberg. He took her hand and said he had heard a rumor that there was a mountain bird so beautiful that even the Duke himself was captivated by her. She didn't know what to say, as this was the first she'd heard of it. Even in the hallway, he couldn't shake the thought of how lovely she was. Since she didn't know who he was at the time, he suggested they pretend it never happened. This guy was much friendlier than Serena had imagined. Afterwards, the prince turned to the Duke, saying it was a big step for him to attend the reception, seeing as his castle hadn't been attacked by monsters or buried by an avalanche. The Crown Prince asked the Duke why he was so quiet, given that they hadn't seen each other in a long time. The Duke reminded him that he had never been a man of many words. His Highness knew this about him, so, as a punishment for his silence, he demanded a dance with Serena. Calcion couldn't argue or refuse, so he just bowed in agreement, if that could even be called an agreement. Larson invited the lady to dance, and she accepted with honor, as from now on, she would be known as the woman who danced with the Crown Prince. He took her hand, pulled her closer, and wrapped an arm around her waist. And just like that, they began to dance in front of everyone. The Duke himself was also watching the dance. The very same Duke the Prince had said was eager to draw his sword. Larson didn't want to involve Serena in his feud with the Duke, but he thought that guy was completely unsuitable for a peaceful life. He admitted that the Duke himself was calm, but you couldn't say the same for the people around him. Serena becoming Calcion's partner had certainly stirred things up, to turn things in her favor. She pointed out that there was much more buzz surrounding the charming prince than the Duke. Then he mentioned that the way she looked at him in the hallway was different, but it changed after she found out he was the Crown Prince. His sharp mind made her uneasy, so she dodged the question, saying that Larson had always been dazzling in her eyes. This flattery worked well on him. He said the tune she sang was more beautiful than he had imagined, and it was a pity she was with the Duke. But he calmed himself down, saying it wasn't time to be upset yet, since they weren't married after all. So he asked her directly if he still had a chance to catch her eye. She thanked him for the sentiment, but didn't know how to answer, so he suggested she just admit she was interested in him. It seemed that when Calcion said the prince was cold and ruthless, he was referring to this kind of sudden confession right after meeting someone. Larson admitted he was impatient, but if he waited, she would end up marrying the Duke. She noticed his behavior in the hallway had been different. Perhaps it was because he found out who she was with, or maybe he was suspicious of them. But her beauty completely made up for the fact that the Duke suddenly had a new partner. It seemed the prince knew Calcion very well. He wasn't easily fooled, as he suddenly wanted to know where a beautiful girl like her came from, having never seen her before. She found it funny that he had heard rumors about her, but didn't know who she was. And he said he only learned her name today. She didn't believe the number one suspect knew nothing about her, and yet he was putting on such an innocent act. Solina said she was just a commoner, unfamiliar with such occasions. He, in turn, pointed out her graceful demeanor and excellent dancing skills, saying she was very talented. Solina couldn't yet say the prince was a cruel person. He just seemed cute and charming. Maybe he was testing her in some way. It was hard to tell. Too bad for the guy. The music stopped, and he had to return Solina to her partner. He told the Duke he was a lucky man to have such a beautiful and talented lady. Calcion said nothing, and the young man felt that his friend had been with her for so long without ever noticing her merits. After that little spat, he turned to Solina and thanked her for the wonderful time. He said he hoped they would meet again and then kissed the back of her hand in farewell. The guy left the couple, leaving the girl flustered. She had so much to tell the Duke and already wanted to go back. Soon, the two were in the carriage. She was tired, social events were exhausting, and she wanted to finish the investigation as soon as possible. She told her partner that while he was talking with Baron Zion, she managed to get some information out of Fiona. First, she asked if the Duke knew that the girl was head over heels in love with him, although it was obvious since she had already confessed directly. Then she asked if he thought Fiona was sincere about him. A look of uncertainty suddenly appeared on his face. The truth was he had never thought about it because he didn't care. Fiona's feelings for Calcion were so strong that she didn't hesitate to visit a man whose fiancé had just passed away without any embarrassment. Unfortunately for her, her efforts were in vain, so she decided to change her strategy. The heroine found this comical. After laughing, the girl collected her thoughts and concluded that since Fiona was genuinely in love with the Duke, she wouldn't want to harm him in any way, so she couldn't have been involved in the crime. She also mentioned that Fiona had warned her to be careful with men. Solina believed a man was responsible for Ariel's death, but the Duke didn't know who it could be. The girl then suggested they think about what Lady Janet and Juna had said, threats and rumors. But this was the first the Duke had heard of them. Since these words came from people who disliked Ariel, Solina only half believed them, so she needed someone who had been the girl's friend. Solina suddenly became curious about what the Duke and Zion had talked about at the reception, and the answer came quickly. They talked about money. The girl found this, to put it mildly, outrageous, because the guy's daughter had just died, yet he was worried about money. Calcion explained that various bad rumors about Baron Zion's family were circulating, and he had tried to convince him they weren't true. Then the guy asked for a refund on all the furniture he had bought so that it wouldn't damage the Duke's reputation in the future. Calcion said the Baron would come tomorrow. The heroine was annoyed by Zion's lack of grief and felt that everyone here was strange. Then, the guy suddenly remembered someone they both knew and told the girl to be careful of the Crown Prince. Solina didn't quite understand what she had to overthink about the prince, especially since they had already agreed that the Duke was much more handsome. But since the Crown Prince was involved in a murder case, she needed to get close to him. Calcion's expression changed, as if he were jealous of something, acting like this even when they were alone. Honestly, it made the heroine want to laugh a little. To her surprise, the prince was so nice to her that she almost believed he was always like this. The Duke's reaction seemed to indicate he thought the prince was crazy, but if his behavior was different, then it was worth thinking about. Maybe he was like this with all women, or only with Solina. Or perhaps it was because she appeared with the Duke. If he was really connected to the murder, then she had to be extra careful, because this guy held a lot of power. The heroine thought she glimpsed Juna outside the window, which was strange because with so much work at the mansion, she shouldn't be at the festival. If she showed up anyway, it was suspicious. She had deliberately lied, clearly with an ulterior motive. Of course, Solina suggested they follow her, as she had a hunch they could discover something. Soon, the group was disguised as tourists attending the festival, and the girl was very pleased with her masterpiece. To avoid looking suspicious, they had to act normal and not draw extra attention. For example, they could pretend to be a couple bursting with hormones who had just ducked into an alley. Solina took complete charge of the situation, planting a kiss on the guy's cheek that left him stunned. This girl's acting was simply amazing, pretending she would never let go of her lover. As for Calcion, he could barely hold it together and had to tell himself to focus because they were on a mission. The man Juno was going to meet was annoyed by the couple's behavior, as if there were other people around. But Juno wanted to get down to business quickly, as neither of them had much time. It turned out her contact was a girl who told her about a tea party at the Heiza household and said the invitation would be sent later. Serena was trying hard to eavesdrop the whole time. Then the girl asked Juna what she thought of the new mistress. She was just like Ariel, ignorant about everything and always wanting to do things her own way. The maid thought the lady had no weaknesses and suspected she had seduced a whole bunch of men in her past. Serena suddenly lunged at the other woman, furious that the maid dared to talk about her like that. But Calcion stopped her in time, told her to calm down, and then pulled her hood over her head. The red-haired woman said the Duke of Lombard was charmed by the new lady, but Juna said Lady Janet wouldn't tolerate it. Juna also told her friend that thanks to Serena's meddling, the butler and a maid had recently been fired. The red-haired woman didn't even know the Duke's partner, but had already decided she was more depraved than Ariel. And her current interest in the Duke was only temporary, because his former fiancée had been the same way. Serena thought about what they said. Maybe the girls meant that if she was with Calcion now, she would definitely have problems with men in the future. Then they arranged their next meeting spot at the cosmetic shop when the tea party started. After the two girls left, Calcion ordered his man on the roof to continue monitoring them. Now the heroes just had to wait and see. And Serena promised to find a way to get Juna to open up. Now that their secret mission was over, the Duke decided they could go home. But she disagreed. She wanted to stay for the festival, as it was in full swing. He finally gave in, and then said the flower wreath they bought suited Serena perfectly. She was flattered and put the same wreath on his head, because she thought flowers suited him too. She was enjoying all the fun and couldn't wait to stroll through the festival. After all, they still needed to buy more flowers. A while later, the couple returned to the mansion. Serena was thrilled that the Duke had even agreed to go to the festival again. The mansion servants were shocked that their master had actually gone to a festival. To tease them, the girl gave him a peck in front of everyone. She said it was a thank you and then went to take a bath. And the Duke was just left stunned, a completely expected reaction. Serena was already relaxing in the tub with her maid, gushing about the gossip from tonight's party. In addition, she dropped a bombshell, saying that something crazy happened and she actually met the crown prince. Juna was stunned by the news and desperately wanted to know what Serena thought of his looks. I mean, she had only ever seen him from distance. So she already knew the prince was a handsome man, especially since Ariel, who had met him, couldn't stop praising him. After that meeting, Ariel had changed, completely smitten and unable to even sleep. That's why the maid told Serena to be careful, lest the same thing happen to her. But then she did a 180, saying it didn't mean Serena should cut ties with the prince. But Serena quickly stopped her, saying she only had eyes for the Duke. Juna was even jealous of how strong their relationship was. With a dreamy smile, Serena began to gush about the Duke, saying he was a war man in private, even though he was always so serious in front of others. She remembered how flustered he got from that kiss at the festival, so she had to get him used to some physical affection. So after a bath, she walked straight into the Duke's study and announced that they were going to practice kissing from morning till night. She felt that since Calcion looked so absent-minded when he kissed, they needed to rehearse pecks on the cheek. It seemed suspicious for a man to be so flustered by a kiss, even though they slept in the same bed every night. They needed to practice, and the Duke understood completely, so he was willing to start as soon as possible. The tutor decided to start with a simple touch to get her model student accustomed to it. The atmosphere was quite romantic, and for some reason, the girl just couldn't concentrate. The man decided to take the initiative and reach for her face, but she stopped him, suggesting they continue another day. The Duke pulled his hand back, his cheeks already flushed. But despite the embarrassment, he asked if he had done everything right. Serena was silent for a moment, her cheeks burning and her gaze seeming a little dazed. But she managed to squeeze out some sounds and praise her partner. The next morning, Serena decided to meet Baron Zion, who had already arrived at the mansion. The girl entered the room and saw the man, who was watching his furniture being packed up, clearly stressed about it. She was here to mourn Ariel and solve the murder, which was why she came to see him. He finally noticed her. She told him not to rush on her account, and he promised it would be quiet again as soon as the furniture was moved out. But she wasn't worried about herself, but about the guest. She wanted him to feel comfortable around her. Zion just turned away, and the girl explained why she wanted this, because she had taken his daughter's place. But the man thought he shouldn't have to suffer just because his daughter had lost that place. She was actually referring to his feelings, because that was something that could never be replaced. Zion raised his voice, making it clear that he wasn't going to cry just because she reminded him of his daughter, or that she could share the estate. Serena hadn't expected this reaction. She just thought he would be grieving over Ariel's death. The man agreed that grief was inevitable, because he could have made a lot more money if someone hadn't been so nosy. The heroine realized she had said something stupid and decided to leave. But before she left, Zion offered some advice. It would be better if the girl knew what she was doing, because someone had already suffered for not knowing. Serena entered the room where the Duke was, and he was looking at a tea party invitation. Incidentally, she had received one too. She said she would look at it later, but she was still surprised to be invited. The man noticed something was off with Serena's expression and asked her what was wrong. She explained that she had just met Baron Zion and that she felt strange because his daughter was dead, yet all he talked about was money. Calcion said that you shouldn't expect more from a nobleman, not even for their own child. Some families did love their children, but for most, children were just weapons to achieve their goals. To the girl, this world was really twisted, and she wondered if the Duke would be sad if she died. He pondered how he would react, what he would feel if he saw Serena dead. She had already given up on getting a response, telling him not to worry. She knew he wouldn't be sad. He denied it, and honestly, she would have believed him if he had just acted surprised. Calcion was struggling for an answer, and he had indeed been furious when he heard about the attack, and the sight he saw had upset him. The answer was almost on the tip of his tongue, but Dion interrupted his thoughts, bringing news that he had completed his investigation and found out which family the maid Juna belonged to. She desperately wanted a more specific answer and got it right away. The family belonged to Count Hyza. Serena had heard the name before. It belonged to Laurel, the blue-haired girl who saw her arguing with Rosalind. She had heard the name from Juna and had also found their invitation. It all had to be connected, and she needed to go and find out. As Juna was getting Serena ready, she was contemplating which tea party to attend. She wanted to go to both, but the dates overlapped. Since the maid knew all these families, she asked for her advice on which one to choose. After a little probing, Juna chose the Hyza family, which was exactly what the heroine had expected. But Lady Hyza hadn't been very welcoming at the reception, although according to the maid, Ariel had spoken highly of her. The maid practically insisted, saying it was a huge mansion and a good place to build connections. So she decided to go. Juna told her that the lady could come to her with these kinds of questions anytime, as she was very experienced. Since Serena didn't want to damage the Duke's reputation, she decided to go to Lady Janet for advice. She was embroidering something on Calcion's shirt. She then asked the girl to sit down and wondered what kind of advice she needed. Serena explained that she was invited to a tea party and needed to know what to look out for and how to behave. Her mentor explained that how a tea party goes depends on the host, and if the Duke escorted her, she wouldn't have to be submissive about everything. But if she went alone, she would have to adapt and try to blend in slowly. It sounded difficult to her, as every court reception had its own atmosphere, and people were always divided into cliques. She could try to blend in, but people might find her strange, just as they did with Ariel. But Janet had already taught her the basics, and she had even been to a reception at the royal palace. So she just had to do what she had done before, and there would be no problems. The girl remembered her behavior at that reception, breaking her mentor's most important rule of etiquette. Since Lady Janet didn't know what happened there, it meant she didn't have any close noble friends at that reception, so she couldn't be a pawn for anyone. The protagonist got a huge clue about Ariel's death and had no more reason to question Janet. So she thanked her mentor and was about to leave, but the woman stopped her because she wanted to warn her about something. She said that at tea parties, people might seem friendly, but they could be exchanging gestures and signals that only they understood. She also gave a tip that if the invitation came in a red envelope, it was better to come in a black dress. According to her, the Duke had never attended such events, and maybe this time he would. Now the girl understood where this generous advice was coming from. Lady Janet was simply infatuated with the Duke. Soon, Serena was ready for the tea party. She wore a stunning outfit that fit her figure perfectly. The only problem was that it was difficult to move in, but hey, what can you do? And with that, she headed for the exit. The Duke was also ready, dressed in a white suit that matched his partner's. They went all out last time, so this time she felt they should be a little more low-key. She suddenly stopped to look at him and asked if he really needed that cloak. After getting the answer she wanted, she asked to borrow it to show off, and he draped it over her shoulders. She thanked him, saying it would be her secret weapon. After all, you have to be prepared for anything, right? Calcion told Serena not to overdo it today, which she found sweet. She told him not to cry and not to miss her too much. He just told her to stop joking and get going. But she knew he liked her jokes. She called his name to get his attention and gave him a light peck on the cheek, telling him it was a farewell kiss and that he would get another one before bed. She hopped into the carriage, promising to be back soon, and set off safe and sound. And he was left behind, blushing furiously. Maybe it was good practice for him, but still completely unexpected. This was the first time our girl was going somewhere without Calcion, so she was a little nervous, but she would do anything to get back to her world as soon as possible. The Duke was a little worried about her, as this was her first time going so far without him. But hey, at least half of his guard were with her. But he was still nervous, wondering if the carriage would even come back. Just then, a servant standing by told him they could head to the training grounds. Serena arrived at her destination, but she didn't expect all the good spots to be taken. It seemed she should have arrived earlier. She walked over to the table where Laurel and Rosalind were sitting and thanked the lady for the invitation. If the invitation had actually stated a meeting time, she would have been there. So she apologized for being late. Rosalind said that Serena actually looked pretty good today, as Laurel had been worried she only had white clothes in her wardrobe. The Duke had picked out this outfit for her today. The girls had too many clothes because her man bought her one every chance he got. He usually made her dress up just for him, but today he made an exception. When Calcion saw her in that dress, he said she looked incredibly beautiful and put a cloak on her so she wouldn't attract too much attention. Serena apologized for being too flashy, but Laurel reassured her that everyone understood. Now that Serena had said her hellos, she decided to find a seat and walked over to a table with two girls she didn't know. The moment she mentioned the Duke, everyone who had been making fun of her shut their mouths. This really annoyed her, but she still put on an easygoing and friendly facade, greeting everyone present. The heroine looked up. The place was truly magnificent. It was just a shame that the people here only knew how to insult each other. After a while, Solina felt bored. She had already confirmed that Laurel and Rosalind were connected. Since there was nothing else to do, she might as well just leave. Suddenly, Miss Laurel asked for everyone's attention, announcing that she and Rosalind needed to step away for a moment to discuss something important. No one objected to their brief departure. The guests told them to hurry back. As soon as the two girls left, the atmosphere immediately became super awkward. But Solina had already expected this. She even found it a little amusing. A girl at the same table suddenly started talking to her, as if she wanted to ask something, but wasn't sure if she should. In the end, she asked if Solina's dress was a Lemaire. But Solina didn't answer directly, as she had many clothes. The girl said the designer's name was engraved on the inside of the sleeve or on the ribbon, and asked if she could take a look. After Solina agreed, the girl checked, and sure enough, the dress was definitely a Lemaire. Super gorgeous and expensive. The girl pointed out that Solina's ribbon was tied incorrectly, and only then did she understand why Juna had been acting strange all morning. Solina thanked her for the tip, said she was going to the washroom, and the girl showed her the way. Solina noticed the attitude of those around her suddenly changed. It was probably because Rosalind was gone, but she didn't need to be warm to them, because they were only being nice to her now because she might become the Duchess. Solina found the bell she was supposed to ring, but then she heard a very loud noise, like someone screaming. Although it was unclear what was happening, Solina decided to head in the direction of the scream. As soon as she opened the door, she heard a girl inside screaming that her dress had been stained, and a maid was trying to help her clean it. It was Laurel, and she was complaining about a certain girl, saying that girl was far inferior to her in every way and that her arrogance wouldn't fade in 1,000 years. The heroine guessed she was complaining about Rosalind. This was a bit strange, as they were supposed to be best friends. She kept complaining, saying Rosalind first declared she would become the crown princess, and now she suddenly wants to be the Duchess. She didn't understand why Rosalind needed to see the crown prince, nor did she know what she really wanted. Suddenly, Solina decided to reveal herself, saying she had overheard an interesting conversation and thought Rosalind would want to hear a summary. Laurel was completely caught off guard and startled at first, but then she decided to find out what Solina was doing there. Solina said she just happened to be in the powder room and accidentally overheard the conversation. This piqued her interest. She wasn't in a hurry, so she was happy to discuss it, as she had thought Laurel and Rosalind were close. Even though Laurel was bad-mouthing her friend behind her back, she still thought Solina shouldn't get involved. Then our heroine said she heard Laurel call Rosalind a crazy bitch. If Rosalind found out, she would definitely blow up. Laurel realized she had been played and was being threatened, so she agreed to talk properly. But Solina told her they had already started. The truth was, Laurel and Rosalind were close because their families had common interests. They sometimes cooperated and sometimes competed. Right now, they were cooperating, and things between them were very direct. Laurel admitted she wasn't intentionally cold to Solina. It was just that some things were beyond her control. It was Rosalind who ordered everyone to attack Solina at the party. Now she had invited Solina for tea while the Duke was away, so everyone could shamelessly pick on her. Laurel said she wanted to get to know Solina better and had no reason to give her a hard time. But as for why Rosalind was doing this, she had no idea. Our heroine asked her for advice on how to befriend Rosalind, because if they got along, they could hang out together. Laurel didn't answer right away. Solina almost thought she was lying about wanting to get along. Laurel couldn't let Solina tell Rosalind everything she had heard. She had to think fast. She spouted some nonsense about their two families being in the jewelry business together, which was why they hung out. She wouldn't be tied to Rosalind forever, and once her family made a deal with the Lombard family, they could ditch her. Our heroine suggested that if the Hayes family wanted to work with the Lombard family, they should befriend her. She could ask the Duke for a personal favor for a friend. So they had Laurel write a letter to the Duke, because if Solina delivered it, it wouldn't arouse any suspicion. But Miss Hayes was skeptical. She didn't think the Duke would go that far for her. Despite this, they pushed paper and a pen at her, telling her to start writing now, and reminded her to mention that she and Solina had become friends and that she had heard a lot about the Duke. So she began to write, thinking that if she could get the Duke on her side, Rosalind would be finished. She folded the letter, terrified that this would backfire on her. She couldn't let the Duke get this letter. Just as the thought crossed her mind, someone grabbed her wrist and snatched the letter away. Solina thanked her and promised to handle it, said it would be a testament to their friendship. The heroine was very pleased with her results. Thanks to this letter, Laurel had automatically become her slave. Now she needed to find Rosalind and the Crown Prince. She didn't have to look for long. As soon as she spotted them, she hid behind a tree and began to observe. The Crown Prince placed his hand on the lady's shoulder, telling her that she had shown him a vulnerable side, for which she was apologizing. Solina guessed there was something going on between the two, as the man was also talking about feelings. He even mentioned something about her behaving well, and the girl's flushed cheeks were a dead giveaway that something was up. They hugged. Solina didn't know what to say, but concluded this wasn't just a fling. Rosalind was completely smitten with him. The lady had been expected for a while, so she had to go back, and they said their goodbyes. Then the Crown Prince turned towards Solina, wondering how long Duke Lombard's little bird was going to hide. The heroine didn't quite understand how she'd been spotted from so far away, but greeted him anyway. Layson said he and Rosalind were childhood friends, and that he thought of her as a little sister. Solina pointed out how close they were, and the Crown Prince agreed, saying they always supported each other. But she always felt something was off. She remembered that Rosalind had almost become the Crown Princess, but she didn't seem to like him at all back then. Layson had just dropped by to see Rosalind and hadn't expected to run into Solina. He called it fate, this crazy coincidence. Too many coincidences to be ignored. But she didn't think it was fate, just one person desperately trying to see another. He doubled down, saying she should be happy and agree with him. But she reminded him that she was the Duke's woman. And as far as she knew, the Crown Prince did not like the Duke. Solina's sharpness earned her a compliment from Layson. The guy admitted he knew he shouldn't approach her, but when he saw her, his heart told him otherwise. She was completely stunned and didn't know what to say. She suddenly realized the Crown Prince might actually be interested in her. A few seconds later, she tried to make him understand how wrong this was, but Layson didn't see anything wrong with wanting to get close. I mean, she was both beautiful and hot. The girl told him that since she was with the Duke, he needed to cool it. But the Crown Prince wasn't asking for much, though he felt the Duke was too possessive, not even allowing her to spare a glance for other men. Besides, she wasn't married to him, and he hadn't made any promises about their future anyway. Suddenly, someone hugged the girl from behind, pulling her close. It was Calcion. He announced that he would be making a promise very soon. Just an hour ago, when he escorted her, he had mentally counted all the nights he had spent with her, a number that would put anyone at ease. Then a servant came over to remind him they were due at the training grounds. The man reminded himself one last time that Solina was safe. But even during practice, he couldn't stop worrying and was using too much force. Dion tried to calm him down, saying it was just a practice spar. But the Duke remained lost in his own thoughts. His partner told him to try again, but not so hard. But all the Duke could think about was Solina, who was now in danger. He rushed out of the training grounds, saying something must have happened to Solina, because accidents always happen out of nowhere. Dion didn't understand. What could possibly happen at Lilith's tea party? Just then, the Duke started to think. But then his mind filled with all sorts of terrible scenarios, which spurred him into action. Although it all seemed strange, Calcion's intuition was right, because he appeared by Solina's side just in time. In the nick of time, he told the Crown Prince that he was being careful with Solina, but if it bothered her, he was willing to make a promise. He apologized for interrupting their conversation, but he was just overly protective of the people he cared about. The people he cared about. The Crown Prince had known this for a while, but he still felt it was unfair, because the girl was not his property, which meant she was free to talk to Layson and had every right to follow her heart. Calcion knew all this, but he refused to let the girl go, simply because he didn't want to. After their little spat, the Crown Prince warned the Duke to be careful, because if he pushed too hard, the little bird might fly away. But if that happened, Layson had a cage big enough for her to spread her wings. To this, Calcion just said thanks, not even bothering to hide his displeasure. Then the Crown Prince said he'd had enough small talk for the day and asked if he could say goodbye to the lady. But he was refused. The guy wasn't too upset, but he apologized to Solina for his rudeness in not being able to say goodbye. He promised to continue their conversation the next time they met. Solina reluctantly agreed as he held her even tighter. The Crown Prince found this a little amusing. The Crown Prince left, and the girl reminded the Duke he could let her go now. She asked him why he had suddenly appeared, and he just said he was passing by. The girl praised his acting, saying she needed to dig deeper to figure out the Crown Prince's game. But the Duke had shown up at the worst possible moment. The guy clearly didn't like that, even implying the girl was considering switching to the Crown Prince's side. She thought her partner was being an idiot, as she had no reason to switch sides. After all, the Duke was the only one who could send her back to her own world. The guy froze for a moment, completely forgetting their deal. She had already given him a good scolding for it. She said she was fine, and there was no need for Calcion to come, because the Crown Prince probably wouldn't have hurt her anyway. He'd had countless opportunities to get rid of her, but he hadn't. So there must be a reason he was approaching her, or maybe he wasn't pretending to be in love with her, but had been serious all along. At this thought, the Duke's jaw nearly hit the floor. But if that were true, then he and the Crown Prince could have a duel to the death. And then Calcion would have a legitimate reason to kill him. Solina confirmed that Rosalind controlled Laurel, and that there was something going on between her and the Crown Prince. But the Duke said that guy definitely didn't care about her, because that guy loved no one but himself. The Duke told Solina not to believe his nonsense or think he was in love with her, because that was absolutely impossible. The heroine was certain Calcion hated the Crown Prince's guts, considering he went ballistic every time he was mentioned. Next, she decided to go for tea with the royals. The Duke asked if he could escort her. The problem was she had been invited alone, but now they were both sitting at the table, and the guy hadn't left yet. The girls thought the two of them were cute together, but Viral still hadn't expected to see the Duke here. Solina explained that he had just come to check on the atmosphere of the tea party, and that he would be leaving soon. To get his support and agreement, she gave him a pinch on his leg where no one could see. But the guy didn't even flinch and just stayed still. Despite this, Viral was glad they had come. She had been looking forward to seeing them again since last time. People started gathering around the heroine. They had never seen anyone who could drink so much. Everyone was in awe of her talent. Many wanted to chat with her a little longer. Solina was glad there was at least one place that welcomed her. To them, she was practically Dionysus himself. She was thrilled to have made such a good impression. So she called for the party to begin and raised the first glass to their health. She ordered everyone to drink up, warning that she was watching. But suddenly, someone snatched her cup from her hand. It was Calcion, who without a hint of guilt, just took her drink and downed it in one go, while everyone else stood there, dumbfounded. He explained his actions by saying they had many enemies and the risk of poisoning was high, especially at a first tea party. So he had warned her that he would drink for her, as he was immune to poison. Solina was about to tell him he shouldn't have done that, but the crowd behind her screamed, completely captivated by the romance of it all. The girl said they completely understood and wanted to drink with him. Then they all chanted in unison, toasting to the Duke's infinite love. The heroine had no problem with this at all. These people were kind-hearted and treated her like a person, not just the Duke's mistress. After a while, Viral was already quite drunk. She guessed the Duke must be bored out of his mind, judging by the way he was drinking. The guy confirmed her suspicion. Even though she said he shouldn't have come to a gathering like this, it meant a lot to them that he could join. Then she concluded that the guy was super worried about Miss Solina and asked him to confirm her suspicion. He did confirm it, saying he wouldn't leave her alone in a place with men and alcohol. Viral found this incredibly cute. She was curious how the lady had managed to melt his icy heart, making him willing to even go to places he didn't want to be. The guy smirked and gave a rather interesting answer. Said it was all because of her beauty. Viral didn't quite understand why Solina was so surprised. She heard that kind of thing every day, but she said she just hadn't expected him to say it out loud. She hurried off, saying she needed to go to the washroom, while the others were impressed by her quick thinking. She was just so embarrassed. She didn't know when Calcion had become such a smooth talker. The guy said he would accompany her. He didn't care that it was the washroom, because anything could happen, just like when she ran into the Crown Prince. She said there was no way he could just show up there, and even if he did, there was nothing he could do. But the guy wouldn't budge. Just then, a woman walked over. She had heard the whole conversation. She advised the Duke not to cross a lady's personal boundaries. The savior greeted Solina and introduced herself as the Duchess of Orleans. The girl was delighted they had finally met. The Duke noted she wasn't carrying a weapon. She replied that you don't show your weapons at a social gathering and that he shouldn't underestimate her skills. She asked if she could escort Solina, and Solina was all for it, especially since the Duke had mentioned her amazing skills. So Solina took the Duchess's hand and told Calcion to stay put and not to peek. Once they were alone, she told her she had never seen him like that before. The Duchess just said that he cared for her a lot. In fact, the Duchess hadn't expected Solina to be like this. She thought the Duke's woman would be a femme fatale, but here she was, blushing like a child. Noticing her big reaction, she quickly explained she meant no harm and that it was a compliment. That's when our heroine realized she meant no harm and was just very straightforward. The Duchess had found Solina interesting last time, but now after talking to her, she was completely sure. Our heroine was used to being disliked before people even met her, and then having people try to scheme against her at their first meeting. The Duchess said that's just how high society is. They don't care who you are, they'll always say the opposite of you. She said Solina was still a rookie in high society, but was already unsure of herself. Or maybe she was looking for someone better than the Duke. Our heroine was stunned, and the Duchess laughed at her reaction. She apologized, saying she guessed she hadn't been clear enough. What she meant was that she really liked Solina as a person and wanted to hang out with her, regardless of which man she ended up with. She said the men of the Lombard family were notorious for changing women, both in the past and present. Even though they seemed lovey-dovey now, looking at the Duke's history, it was hard to believe it would last. The Duchess really liked Solina, so she didn't want to see her get her heart broken. The girl felt she was being told she deserved better, which confirmed that the other person liked her. But she was clearly cold toward Calcion. The Duchess backtracked, saying she liked him too, and that it was hard to find people like the two of them. The heroine realized Calcion was seen as a playboy here, so everyone assumed she was just a fling to him. Then she had a brilliant idea, so today she was going to stir things up at the tea party. Meanwhile, Calcion was already getting antsy that the girls had been gone for a while. Viral tried to calm him down, saying they were probably just chatting. The Duke suddenly asked if there was any guarantee that the washroom was a safe place. This surprised the girl. Not getting an immediate answer, the guy got a little angry that they hadn't told him right away that the place wasn't confirmed to be safe. Viral was taken aback by his reaction, which confirmed her suspicion that the Duke was definitely not a patient man. Just then, Solina finally walked over. The Duke and Viral hadn't expected her to show up so suddenly, but they played it cool. From that point on, the heroine kept calling the Duke darling, which took everyone else by surprise. She asked her darling to get her a new cup as she didn't want to finish the drink she already had. Since he was contractually obligated to do whatever she said, he calmly complied. This did not escape Viral's notice. But after the new cup was placed in front of her, she suddenly changed her mind and asked for just water. Viral felt like Solina was training the Duke like a dog, seeing how calmly he obeyed all her commands. At her request, the guy even added 3 ice cubes to the water and asked if she needed anything else. But she just asked him to sit with her. The girl rested her head on the man's shoulder and went on about how everyone thought their relationship was just a fling. She was curious just how far her darling was willing to go for her. So she asked him straight up. His answer was that this guy was willing to do anything for her. Then she asked if her Duke could pluck a star for her. He said he would first figure out how to reach it, and she was satisfied with that. So for now, her request was just for him to pick a flower from a tree. Solina was asking for a dream, and next she might want him to get her the clouds. And then what? The damn stars would be next. So Calcion stood up and silently walked towards the tree, while Solina watched without a word. The guests were all watching this whole romantic scene, and they exchanged looks of complete shock. When he reached the tree, the guy leaped up and grabbed the flower Solina had pointed to. He plucked the flower that was to be his gift and landed smoothly on the ground in a very elegant move. Then he walked over to Solina and gently tucked the flower behind her ear while she just kept staring. After presenting his gift, he looked at her gently, smiled, and told her that the clouds would have to wait. So the heroine smiled back, reached out to hug the Duke, and promised that she would indeed wait. The next day, Solina was already sitting with Juna. The table in front of her was piled high with a mountain of invitations. The maid reminded her that it would take a long time to pick out dresses for all those parties, but she just wanted to relax. In the end, Solina went to train with the Duke and left Juna to sort through all the invitations. The maid wished her a good time. As soon as the door closed, she started frantically rummaging through the envelopes. She didn't know how to find the right one in that pile of letters, as she didn't even know who sent it. But she knew she needed to find an envelope with a Hayes family crest, and she found it quickly. With this letter, she could get more money out of Laurel. But before she could finish her thought, Solina burst into the room. The heroine had finally caught her maid in the act and demanded she hand over the letter.